Technology is ready to go.
I won't let myself take more notes.
Well, I'll give you more, a few more.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, trustees, let's, Mamasi's here. I saw Tina. There she is. Hi, Tina.
Oh, it's horrible. It's a nightmare. We've been there since we bought the property in 92 or 3. What property? 93. And we moved in here. We moved in 94. We've been on the road since 1994 with no problem. These people move in.
Hi, Tina. How are you? Good.
Every tree is now. I could see straight through the wood court.
Okay, trustees, we will call the meeting to order. We have everyone here? I think so. I just want, before we do the pledge, I just want to say that we convened an executive session to discuss collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of the Civil Service Law and matters leading to the appointment or employment of a particular person or persons. At that point, I would like to ask everyone to please rise. If you're not already rising, you guys are ready to go. We'll say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thanks everyone for coming. Thank you to the trustees and for some special guests we have here tonight. Tina, appreciate you coming. I would like to now ask for a motion on the approval of our minutes from September 23rd, 2021. Is there a motion? I hear a second as well. Any questions or comments on those minutes? Please.
Believe it or not, I had a tiny one, but I'm looking at Mary Ann because I thought it had to do with, I'm sorry. There was under new business, I'm doing this without looking at it. There was a reference to October 7th, which was the meeting in which it was taking place. Maybe I'm misreading it.
No, it was September 23rd, the meeting.
The meeting was today's October 27th. Wait, what do you mean?
It said for further discussion at
Yes,
our next
forgive me, I
meeting.
just publicly showed how my brain is working lately. Yeah,
You're here on the right date though, so we're good.
sorry,
Okay.
guys.
Any other questions or comments on the minutes? This is too loud. I'll lower it right where it is. All right, all in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. And we'll move over to Dr. Thomas Dolan for the report from our superintendent.
Thank you very much. Everybody hear me? Is that okay? Shelley, can you hear me? You're the litmus test. Thank you all for being here. I try to say that individually to people, but thank you as a group as well. Lots going on, as always. First, I want to extend an invitation to our homecoming, which will take place next Saturday. We're very excited that we're even having a homecoming, and I hope that doesn't sound naive. You know, we worried a great deal about whether or not health conditions would allow us to have some events, and this is a big one, and it's important for a high school and a district to have a homecoming, and we have managed to pull off a homecoming that is just about the same as other homecomings have been, with two notable exceptions, one being no bouncy house. You might want to get that word out. That was the one event that we thought was probably not a good idea given the current health circumstances. But there are a couple of other events that our parents have helped us to organize, and I think it's going to be a fun day. The other change is an emphasis that we're working on, and with Shelley Newman's inimitable help, and we thank you very much for that, Shelley, to make this a really sincere celebration for our alumni. So we're trying to find ways to get word out to our alumni to attend the game. I think I'm looking at a few of them up here on the board. Please plan on coming to the game. There will be introductions by decade. We're going to look to see which decade can make the best appearance at the homecoming. There will be some special recognition for the alum who is the most senior alum, and we have something planned for that person. So we're going to wait and see who can make it there. We'd really like to make this a celebration, and we've done a lot of homework. Note that it is not called the Viking alumni, because we have come to find out that way back before 1955, there were no Viking alumni. When it was Seacliff High School, I think that it was the Cliff alumni. What was the word that we found?
Cliffonians.
the Cliftonian alumni. So we've actually taken that word out because we don't want to offend anybody from before 1955. We're looking for a great day, and we invite everybody to be there. There will be a mailing on that will go out. We're inviting everybody to be there, and I hope you will. But that's not the only thing going on. It's been a difficult fall. I certainly don't have to tell anybody that. And we're trying very hard in the month of October, while there's still some nice weather, to introduce some outdoor activities at our elementary schools. Each of the elementary schools will feature a Halloween event of some sort. We're going to try to make that as festive as we can and safe. You know, we're still struggling with that balance, but we can do it. We've done it thus far. And then each of the elementary schools will also have another event that they will plan with their PTOs specific to that building, whether it's an outdoor movie or some other event. I know there's several conversations going on. But before the good weather disappears, we wanted to remind the kids that, and the adults, that school can be fun, that we can mix those festive activities with what's going on academically. And I thank the principals very much for their willingness to be creative and to try to do that. We're going to make this a good fall. There'll also be a pep rally at the high school, outdoors, of course. And I spoke to my colleagues in other districts, and schools are trying to do pep rallies and outdoor activities, and certainly homecoming. We're all trying to come back this fall and show what schools can be like. Let me give you an update on the vaccination program that's going on. As you may know, we are now in the midst of an obligation on the part of our teachers, as per the state, for teachers either to become vaccinated or, if they choose not to, and they certainly can choose not to subject to weekly testing. We're in the process right now of collecting vaccination status. I thank Chris and Olivia very much for setting up a really efficient electronic way to do that, that we've been able to collect it. And I thank Marissa from our office and Sophie also, who've been collecting that data. And I can report that we are over 450 people who have reported that they are vaccinated. And they've reported that voluntarily. Now, tomorrow, they will receive, those who are not vaccinated will receive a notice that, as they've chosen not to become vaccinated, there will be a testing program that we will have on school grounds starting very early in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, so that the people can get there before the school day, and one afternoon after school. The district has contracted with a healthcare provider. People come in, they'll show their insurance ID information at no cost to the district. People will be tested. We'll get those reports back at the end of the week, and hopefully they will all be negative. I was going to say positive. Hopefully they will all be negative. We'll get negative reports, and we will keep doing that on a weekly basis with everyone. It's been a good process. Again, I thank Chris and Olivia for setting it up, and I do also thank the Federation for their assistance in setting it up. We've had several good meetings, and people are accepting that this is something we must do, and we're doing so with the best attitude that can be summoned. Finally, this week saw the second of my D3 discussions with Dr. Dolan. Apologies to the middle school for stealing, that E3 that you have, making it D3. But we had discussions with Dr. Dolan. And what I did was I had two of them, and in each of them I used something called the Johari window, which is a communication device to talk to people about what the school's doing that we need to keep doing, what the school's not yet doing that we should start doing, what we're not doing that we should stop, what we are doing that we should stop doing, and then finally, what we're not doing that we should continue not doing. It's a little convoluted, but it actually really lent itself nicely to a discussion and generated some great ideas that I will be sharing with the board. I was very happy today. I got an email from someone who watched it on TV, who watched the live stream. So we did live stream it, and evidently that was worthwhile. Someone watched it and said thank you and weighed in and gave me some suggestions for a couple of those quadrants. So that the results of that will be shared with the board. And I think you'll be very happy with all four of the quadrants, the things, the intelligence that was demonstrated by it, the good thinking that was demonstrated, and also the photograph, the picture of what it paints for what the district is at this moment in time. Thanks. I will have more to report on later in the discussion item, but for now, I will turn it back to President Ledmar.
Thank you. We now have a new item on our agenda. Oh, by the way, thank you for all the work to our administration for this homecoming. There is a real excitement. You take something away, and it makes you want it that much more. And people are really excited. The kids are excited for it. It's going to be a great hit. The boosters are doing a great job. It's going to be great. So let's go Vikings we're the Vikings now. So here we go. So there's going to be a new item on the agenda which you haven't seen before. but which we will put regularly on the agenda for this year, which is going to be updates on the search for our new superintendent. It's one of our goals for the year, and it's certainly one of the biggest projects that this board will be doing, but it is very much not just a board project. So I want to go through and take some steps back, explain quickly where we've gotten, how we've gotten to where we are right now, and talk about the ways in which the community can become involved. At our September 2nd meeting, we had approved a contract with a firm called School Leadership, which is a consulting firm that's assisted many other Long Island school boards with their searches, and they're going to help us to run the search, to get information from our community, to of course place ads and recruit candidates, and help us throughout all steps of the search. The board met with them. We shared our thoughts and our responses to 3 questions that you may have seen that are being put out there. Number 1, from our perspective, what would attract a highly qualified educator to seek the position of superintendent in our district? Number 2, what do we see as some of the major leadership challenges that the new superintendent will face over the next 3 to 5 years? And number 3, what types of prior experiences and personal and professional qualities would you hope the new superintendent will have? And the reason I read them is because we're one constituency that's answering those questions, but hopefully everyone in the district will answer those questions. And when I say everyone, there are a couple different ways that's going to happen. First, we have identified many specific stakeholder groups who've been invited to meet with them. Our boosters, our parent organizations, our administrators, our teachers, our staff, our central office team, our bus, really everyone, our community members, our civics, the local mayors, everyone has been invited and is very much encouraged to participate in the specific groups that they've been invited for. We're also inviting everyone in the community to 2 community forums. The first is, grab your pens if you're watching this. First is October 13th from 9 to 10:15. That's our daytime session in the central office. And then October 20th, those are both Thursdays, and that'll be from 7:30 to 9 at the high school theater. There's also a survey that's available, and that survey is going to be available online. It's online right now. When you go to the district website, which is northshoreschools.org, there'll be a little, I'm colorblind, but I believe it's blue, thing that pops up on the right side of your screen, and there'll be an easy link to that survey. I've already done it. Everyone should do it. Let us know your thoughts. Share what you were looking for on many different criteria. And there's also paper copies we've been leaving in libraries and local establishments. Again, I want to thank Shelley Newman. You've really, I hope you picked up like treats and sodas and smoothies and all the different things, some good books at the libraries in leaving these around, but they are here. If anyone needs them or doesn't have them, we can give this information. It was also mailed to everyone's home in the district. It's important because everyone who's a taxpayer should have a say in this. Every resident should have a say in this and should express themselves. It's important to really get that sense of what everyone is looking for as we hire the new educational leader for our district. When we have all the feedback compiled, the school leadership firm will analyze the survey results, share that with the board, share the feedback they received at all these different sessions. And what that will build will be the profile of the ideal superintendent for our community. Hopefully, the board will adopt that profile at our November 18th meeting, and that will then lead to school leadership placing ads, working their networks, and building a strong applicant pool to continue the process. But again, the surveys and forums are huge. Please do not miss the opportunities. The fact that you're all here tonight means that you're interested, and so I'm sure you will all do it. But again, looking at the back at the camera, everyone please go to the district website, make sure you fill out that survey. Kids and students too, I should mention, are part of this process, and they're meeting with groups with the school leadership firm and should certainly fill it out. My kids saw it on the kitchen counter. I said, yep, go online and do it, guys. So everyone's doing it. And with that, I look forward to updating everyone at the next meeting. I will now turn it over to Dr. Dolan, who will introduce our first discussion, regular business discussion item, presentation.
Thank you. So I've deferred my report to someone who's come a great distance to do a report on construction status for many of the projects going on around the district. It's hard to drive around the district and not realize the impact you've had. I'm going to introduce one of the partners, I believe, from Mamasi, whose last name I don't know. I will let you introduce yourself, okay? I know your first name, but not your last name, and I apologize for that. But here to do a construction update and tell you some exciting things that are going on. From Mamasi.
So Tina, if possible,
Tina.
because it's So I'll call you Tina. I'm Dave. We've been working together for
want to do that.
several years. But the mic is keyed into the camera. So is it okay to speak into the mic for the? Great. And just make sure that little button is lit up,
It is lit up.
and just point it right at you. And I'm going to turn mine off and let you take over. Thank
Okay.
you.
And is there a clicker or something? Okay. Oh, is it here? Okay. And you can hear me okay? Yes?
We have it on we're good.
Okay. Well, let me let's get this up first. We have to dim the lights potentially to see it. And if you can go to slideshow. It's a little muted on the screen, but you all have a copy at least.
Yep.
Okay, so we have a long agenda because there's a lot going on. We're going to talk through items 1 through 4 are related to the capital project, which is really mostly bonded with some additional funding sources, which is the capital reserve and the general fund. We're going to briefly just overview the energy performance contract that is underway, talk about the middle school softball field renovation. We are also addressing some of the supplemental projects from the 2013 bond, along with Glenwood Landing roof replacement. And then we'll briefly review financing and budget and the schedule. So, did I skip one? I think I did. Yes. Okay. So, phase 1 project overview. If everybody remembers, the capital project or the bond is broken into 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2, and each of those phases is over the course of 2 summers of construction. So it's essentially a 3-year construction project. So phase 1 project overview, at Glen Head, we are doing a secure entrance vestibule, security office, and the main office renovation. And this was all done this summer. Glenwood Landing, same secure entrance vestibule, the nurse's office, and the attendant's office, along with a service provider room. At Seacliff, the work was mostly focused on the entrance to create, again, another secure entrance, and that entailed rebuilding the exterior stair to accommodate that vestibule and the office. And at the middle school, where the bulk of the work is happening, we have a new secure entrance addition, which includes a flexible instructional space and lobby space, a new STEAM lab and math lab, and then renovations to the library, a science lab, the one remaining lab that had not been renovated. We are creating a new fax room and then renovating the existing fax room into the new main office. There are music room renovations, infrastructure upgrades, and the library is also seeing renovations and air conditioning, along with locker room renovations. And then, of course, we've done the district-wide security systems upgrade, which is mostly complete. So I'm going to just review summer 1 construction of where we sort of started and where we are. These pictures are probably the last pictures I think were taken at the first week or 2 of September. So at this point, they are even a little bit further along. But as most of the board is aware that there are a lot of delays in materials because of the lack of labor. There's a shortage of labor to be producing and transporting the materials. So for example, we are still waiting on doors, mostly exterior doors. And in the meantime, we have temporary doors in some of the locations. So at Glen Head, you can see the construction that started in June. The area was really cleared out, and at September 9th, the new security booth and some of the new finishes in that space. The picture on the right is a rendering that we did that's sort of taken a little bit further out. So the doors, you're not seeing the doors in this picture because they're not here yet, but eventually, hopefully soon. Glenwood Landing, we're seeing some of the demolition that took place to create the service provider and the attendance office and the nurses area. You can see the third picture is the service provider area where we refinished the floor and changed some of the finishes to create that area. The nurses suite is actually complete, but we were unable to take photos because it was full of boxes at the time, and there's typically children in the space, so it's hard for us to photograph that space. But it's a very clean, fresh-looking space that accommodates her needs and is working quite well. And then Seacliff was a small project, but a very large project actually, because there was a lot of structural work that had to happen to make this accessible, to create this secure entrance vestibule, and to provide some future means of making it accessible in time. So the middle school, I just wanted to briefly review Summer 1 construction and what that entailed. So you can see the areas that are pointed out are the spaces that were part of this summer, which included a new ensemble space. So we took the existing stage at the cafetorium and created a music space out of that, and then renovated the existing music spaces. The science classroom that's pointed out was renovated on the intermediate levels. The lower level, we renovated the locker rooms completely, really a gut renovation. And also the library media center on the upper level, and some of the bathrooms. You can start to see the library taking shape. There is temporary furniture in the space right now. The furniture is actually available, but because of the conditions with COVID, the librarian and the district has chosen to use the space as it is, with temporary furniture because it's acting as a lunch area. So we'll hold off on installing the new furniture until next summer. And the lighting is not yet installed. The flooring is temporary, and we are waiting also on the reception desk. So there's a temporary reception desk there also.
Are you saying middle school students can't be trusted to eat cleanly on new furniture?
No, I'm definitely not saying that. No, I'm not. You can start to see the locker rooms actually are nearly, they're I would say 99% complete. They look really great. You can see the picture on the right with new floors, new wall tile, new benches and lockers, and starting to see the new lighting. And the music areas. So you can see that we did a lot of work to renovate these spaces, and we also were able to create 2 large ensemble group spaces, which you see in gray in that box. The space on the right is prior to the furniture arriving, where the new flooring is in. However, you're still not seeing the new ceiling system and the lighting that has some acoustical properties to help support the acoustics of the space, and wall panels as well. So again, these are all materials that were ordered as soon as they could be, but because of delays in materials, and this is something that's really across every district right now. Any project that's under construction is seeing the same condition. This is the ensemble space that we created. So you can see the first picture on the left was the stage that we essentially took apart. We left the floor in place, but really created a new space to the right that you're starting to see nearing completion as well. And the science lab is taking shape as well. The casework is all in on the right-hand side. The lab stations are in, but we are still waiting on the loose furniture in this space. And then summer two, the remaining work for summer two is essentially the addition. So the areas in red, the main office, the student wellness center, and the 2 new classrooms, 1 renovated space, and also the fax room. And just as a reminder, this is where, essentially what will take place this next summer. This was the design of the main entrance, walking in where the arrow is into the new secure entrance lobby. The main office on the left of this plan is the new main office, which was fax. Fax gets relocated, and student wellness moves into the old main office. This is the sort of the lobby instructional space, and then the 2 new classrooms, a STEAM lab and a math lab, and then the coding lab on the right-hand side that is a renovated space. So student wellness, so this space will occupy the existing office currently. It's really going to be a really nice space where students, I think, will feel more comfortable going into. This is some of the color materials and the choices that will fill this space also. And then phase 2. So phase 2 is mostly focused on the elementary STEAM labs and media centers at all 3 elementary schools, single user, multi-user toilet rooms across the elementary schools and the high school. And at the high school, where the majority of the work is taking place, we'll be adding a new secure entrance vestibule and security office, as we have on each of the buildings. In phase 1, we are refurbishing the entrance canopy to create a kind of a new, fresh identity and provide some more covered space and some potential instructional space. We are creating 2 new multi-user toilet rooms and 1 single-user toilet room to support the auditorium. And then a new instructional connecting corridor that will create a secure outdoor courtyard from the library and also connect the humanities wing to the math science wing. And then renovations to the media center, the music areas, the technology spaces, fax, and some of the special education spaces as well, which we'll go through. Phase 2 was submitted to SED on September 9th, so it's in their hands right now. They are looking at 4 to 6 weeks. I think that's already now changed to 6 to 8 weeks from the time that we finalized this presentation today. But we are still looking at a bid date in December of 2021, which is earlier than phase 1. So we're hoping for good bidding results, as the market's a little bit tighter, I think, right now. So phase 2 review, scope of work at the high school. You can see all these areas that we will be addressing: the wood shop and the robotics area, choral, band, orchestra, and a media lab at the front of the building. We're essentially reworking the entire main office and guidance suite, and I can show you what that may look like. The new addition is this small area. I don't think this has a laser, does it? Right over here. You can see the connecting corridor up at the top, which also is called out as an alternate to the project as a science research room, which is an add alternate. So if bids come in under budget and the budget allows it, the science research room would be constructed. Media center renovations, a couple breakout rooms that we're renovating or creating actually, and then the locker rooms. And then you see right in the center of the space, there's special education, life skills, and family consumer science. We're going to just start with the media centers at the elementary school. So Glen Head, we are looking at a very sort of fluid space for the children here that has a combination of sort of casual fun seating space, group space, play space, and study space. And the steam room that is off of it is really a combination of a robot, a Lego wall, there's robotic spaces, there's flexible furniture, and lots of storage space. Each of the STEAM rooms, we only are showing one, but they're all essentially designed very similar because the program across all elementary schools is the same. This is the Glenwood Landing Media Center. So this is these are just updated from pre-referendum after some more discussion with the librarians and the principals. So in all cases, though, it's really a combination of different types of seating areas to accommodate different activities in the libraries. And you can see Seacliff as well. There's a block in the high school that I pointed out that we will be reorganizing to create a testing area, which is the space on the left, a life skills space, which is in the center of that diagram, and then FACS, Family Consumer Science, is the space on the right. The image on the right is an example of the FACS room, which is quite similar to the middle school, where we have mobile furniture in the center of the space, the kitchens at one end of the space, roll down electrical cords to support a lot of flexibility for the curriculum. Media center renovation. So this space is going to be renovated. We are looking to bring a lot of sort of student-centered space into the center where a lot of the daylight comes in, creating sort of a media bar and study bar at the back end that would look out windows that will come further down to the floor level. There are lots of different areas in the library, including computer labs on one end, classroom space on the other, breakout rooms, and more variation in both casual space to learn, casual space to study, and formal space to do the same. Wood shop and metal shop. This area is seeing a lot of work. We're creating of a number of different areas within a large area, as well as connections to some of the computer labs that are associated with the wood shop and metal shop. And guidance and main office. So these two spaces will remain in the same location as they are now, but they will be renovated. And we were able to do this in such a way where we've picked up a couple spaces. We were able to get a conference room in the main office, which is something they don't have right now, and provide one additional administrative space that's separate from the two at the center that supports the principal. Excuse me. And then the two spaces remain connected with a door because there is a lot of interaction between guidance and the main office, but there are separate entrances to each. The guidance office is really laid out with the similar type of offices along the window wall, which is mostly counselors, and then some additional spaces along the corridor wall, which you can see a new conference room and another office. So I think this is going to be a great benefit in terms of a number of spaces and the types of office space and the quality of acoustics for privacy at this space. You can see some of the images on the right-hand side. The locker rooms, they are being renovated, and mostly a combination of making them accessible, reworking some of the spaces to provide showers in the locker rooms, or in the team rooms and not in the locker rooms, which is actually where they use them, and really refreshing all the finishes in that space. The layout is similar, a similar approach as the middle school to improve the ability to keep the space supervised and not create too many nooks and crannies across the space. The music wing, we did do a lot of renovations to get the proper size spaces and the right proportion spaces for the type of music. So for orchestra, band, and choral, there are three great spaces that I think are really going to support the program well, that you can see. And then the high school canopy. We are creating a new entrance, which is kind of far at the back of this initial image on the left that you can see up on the right-hand side. So we're extending the front of the building out a little bit to create the entrance vestibule, connecting it to a secure security office. There'll be a completely separate visitor's entrance from the student entrance. And then the space that we filled in, which is where the bathrooms are, right over here. That also is new construction to support the large amount of attendees to the auditorium. And I think that is it for the bond project. The energy performance contract was approved by SCD on August 8th. The financing, I believe, is now in place. And essentially, we will begin implementing that quite soon through 2023, as it will align with some of the construction work for the bond project. It will be addressing, just as a reminder, lighting modernizations, both inside and out, the heating systems, HVAC controls, optimization, building envelope improvements, air conditioning, and some solar panels on Glen Head, the middle school, and the high school. We are looking at the middle school softball field renovation project concurrently. This was actually budgeted back in 2019, and then we ran into some drainage concerns that we had to investigate a little bit further. What it has done, though, it's allowed us now to look at packaging it with the bond project in phase 2, even though it's a different funding source, but really to maximize the efficiencies on the site, as contractors are going to be there anyway. So this, again, is expected to go out as an addendum to the project at the end of this month, and for spring 2022 construction. And then the bond supplemental projects from 2013 are fairly straightforward. There's a roof replacement at Glen Head, and that's really because the roof is beyond its useful life. And the cafeteria wall tile replacement at Glen Head as well, which is just at this point kind of deteriorating and falling off. And then we are also packaging that together with Glen Head Landing corridor roof replacement. And again, a lot of these projects have different funding sources, but we package them together really to maximize our bid packages. And just to review where we are, the bond referendum, the total bond referendum was $39,899,785. For phase 1, we borrowed $15,245,490. Phase 2 again is submitted to the state, so it is not on the streets yet. And then of the other projects, the capital reserve covers the middle school locker rooms and Glen Head Nurse Suite. The general fund covers the middle school library air conditioning, the middle school softball field, and Glenwood Landing roof replacement. Schedule phase 1 we are still doing some of the work at the elementary schools, and again, it's because of the difficulty with getting materials. But the bulk of the work, it should be done, we're hoping by Thanksgiving, by the end of November for phase 1, for summer 1. The middle school construction will start. It started. They're prepping the site. Began as part of the summer 1 construction, but it'll go through next summer, August 2022. Phase 2 is expected. Again, we're expecting approval from SED in December. We will bid an award in January. It's essentially a 2-month process, and then construction will begin in June of 2022. We'll go through 2 summers so that it is ready for September of 2023. And that's all I have. It's a lot to cover, sorry.
Thank you so much, Tina.
You're welcome.
I'll let trustees find their seats again. They may have some questions for you. I also just want to take a moment to point out John Hall, Director of our facilities. Thank you very much. And also Assistant Principal Brendan Nelson from the middle school, who's getting a very shaped up building soon enough. So I don't know if you're here just to see what's coming. I know you're seeing what's there right now, which I'm sure provides a couple more obstacles than normal in terms of the construction, but we appreciate you being here tonight and working your way through it. Thank you. Okay, trustees, if you have any questions for Tina, now is the time. Vice President Jones?
Thank you. Mainly, I just want to say thank you for what was a really comprehensive presentation. It's a tremendous amount of work that's going on in the district, which is, of course, how we maintain the sort of very significant values of our schools, right? That the community is invested in over all these years. This is how we preserve that investment. So I think it was really important to let the community know what we're doing to make sure that value doesn't erode. But I did want to highlight that the energy performance contract that you talked about as being significant in terms of it's going to be a significant reduction in our energy consumption and our emission of greenhouse gases. And I think that's something that's important to the community. And I didn't want to let that go unnoticed because I know you put a lot of work into that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Mosca, did you?
Yes, thank you. Tina, that was great. Thank you so much. Really impressive and dovetailed so nicely with the tour that we had with John Hall the night before school started. And as a parent of a middle schooler, I'm particularly excited about all the renovations going on there. She is eating lunch in the library, and I think she's being very neat, by the way. I just wanted to ask a little bit for fun, if everyone will indulge me. One of the pages, you talked about the new media center in the high school. We're sitting in it, are we
Yes.
not? I just thought it would be interesting, just a 2-minute elevator version of looking at this. I'm looking at the diagram and trying to orient myself to it as I sit here. So that you talked about the bar. That's actually going to be back there.
No, actually, just
so
where
I
you
am
are right
completely
now.
turned around.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's looking.
So
out
the
at-
windows will come down further so that there's a nice view to the courtyard,
Okay.
which will now be enclosed.
and the door and a single door will be in the middle there.
There'll be a
then.
doubled set of doors in the center. Yes.
Okay.
Essentially centered on here, removing the two-door situation that you have now.
Right. And so that's what I'm seeing in this central area is where all the stacks will be.
Well, it's actually a combination. What you're seeing here, and I'll try to point it out maybe. I'll just point it out and I'll go back. There's this area and this sort of center. The center is actually a combination of student working space. So it's like it's benching with tables that they can have their
I see.
Chromebooks and sort of work either independently or as groups. And it kind of alternates from one side to the other as you go through the aisle to the back of this space. And then the stacks are on the other sides of them,
Got
on
it.
both sides, yes.
Okay. And then each of the sort of little wing areas here.
So the left
Are-
space, this wing area, is the computer stations,
Okay.
where the desktops are, which will then breaks out into the reading area or the writing area. There's a breakout room. And then on the right-hand side, basically back here, we're taking all of this out. Any of the stacks will be low. We're actually putting in some glazing on both sides to introduce more daylight into this space. And the back of this area, essentially where we are, this zone will become a full, we'll be able to handle a full class. So
Full-
24 students.
Oh, a class.
Yeah,
Oh, great.
class
Okay.
size. And then the other space that you see just adjacent to that, so I'll point it out again. That's the instructional space, and then there's this enclosed space. The enclosed space is a breakout room, so a small project group-based space.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. And I had one other quick question, I think, back to the energy performance contract. I was just wondering, how were the buildings chosen? How did you choose where to put which buildings would get solar panels? And is there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just leave
It
it.
had to do with the structural capacity of the roofs, the equipment on the roofs. Those two are really the two factors. It's not so much about, what was facing south or north. It's really what's available space and what roof can handle it.
So is it, I mean, this is dreaming
And
now.
slopes, obviously. Flat roof is obviously more useful.
So is it fair to deduce from that and I'm dreaming, right, that the Seacliff School and the Glenwood Landing School then are just, they may never be candidates for solar panels?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank
I mean, through the process, we did a very thorough analysis of that. So yes.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Really great.
Thank you. Trustee McCary?
Hi, very exciting. Exciting time to live in this district. So you spoke a little bit about the delays. I'm curious.
I'm sorry, Andrew, if you just point, no, is it on? Just point the mic right. Yes.
It's on. I'm curious about what you're doing to mitigate some of the delays, to make sure that instruction time is not lost, how to provide labor. What are some of the actions?
For the most part, any delay has been, there's been a temporary material that's been put down. So for example, in the media center, the carpet that's there is a temporary carpet because the carpet that was ordered hasn't arrived yet. In some of the cases, exterior doors are temporary exterior doors and temporary interior doors for that matter. Lighting, the delays, we just have left the lighting in place until the new lighting comes in, similar to ceilings. Again, this is a tough one because no one has any control over the lack of supply right now. And it's across the country. It's very difficult.
So has that increased the cost of the project?
No. It's just delayed the completion.
Okay. And the second question I have goes back to the middle school wellness center. Last time that you came to the board to present, we had spoken a little bit about the glass entryway, and I was concerned that it creates like a fishbowl atmosphere for students who want to seek psychological services and might be dealing with, private issues. And I'm curious whether there's been any.
So there's a privacy film on it that won't allow students from the lobby, from the general corridor area to look in.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Trustee Colasiopa?
Well, again, I want to say thank you and reiterate
You're welcome.
that this is amazing work and it is very exciting. I just had a quick question about the middle school softball field renovation. I know you had said spring of 2022, this spring, right? So how long does that take and where do the children play softball then while it's being renovated?
It's a good question. We did speak with Don. Lang is he here? He's not here though. The consensus was that he would like this done as soon as it can be done and not to wait any longer. So he is willing to move teams to different fields to make it work. And so that's essentially what would happen. But it's a season. I mean, you lose an entire athletic season.
Yeah, at least in my experience of that is that we lost a lot of that season anyway. Anytime a little bit of rain came, the place was a swamp.
Well,
So,
right. And that's the renovations will mitigate that.
thank you. Trustee Galletti?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate it. Can you talk a little bit about this area right behind the window here? I know this is going to become, I guess, an outdoor classroom space because you're going to enclose the walkway between the two wings. Can you talk to me a little bit about access? Is it going to be from both the hallway that's coming in and the library? How is that going to work in terms
Right.
of usability?
I can tell you that there will be access from the library out to the space, and then from the connecting corridor, which is essentially, enclosing the walkway. There will be exits and entrances because that corridor will act as a second means of egress out of the courtyard.
Right.
So,
I was leading to that question because it also involves the second means of egress from the science classrooms
Yes.
right here.
right. So essentially, there's two sets of doors there's an interior set of doors on the courtyard side and then another set of doors on the opposite side of the corridor that let you go through to the other outside space that then is obviously not enclosed. It's always tricky, and we had the same similar circumstances at the middle school when we enclosed the courtyard as well. But we're able to mitigate the egress with working through it with SED and getting their approval and creating a much more secure outdoor space. So,
Thank you.
Trustee Russo?
So I have a question about talking about the light, and now we're gonna put a corridor, right? And I assume it's just a glass, or two glass, and then you're gonna put the science research lab. I'm having a hard time envisioning where that is going to go. Is that gonna be by the one with the schoolhouse?
So again, the science research lab is an ad alternate. So it really obviously depends on how the bids come in. It is basically centered on that corridor, so it's centered also on the schoolhouse. So it allows space on both sides of it for additional construction in the future if additional classrooms were needed.
And how is that, when you put all those structures in place, how is that gonna affect the light that will put all the glass here? And is that,
No, it's only a single story, so there's no disruption of daylighting. Yeah, this will still remain a light-filled area.
and where would that be in relation? So how would that affect access to the one with the schoolhouse? That's what I'm also.
So the one-room schoolhouse will be accessed from the doors in the corridor now, right? From the connecting corridor. If the
How will it go? Like, I mean,
The classroom doesn't go beyond the exterior, your existing exterior wall, so it will stay in line with that. If the science research room is not constructed, I think the doors are centered on the corridor out of the space. So we've had to really design this in two different manners because it vastly changes the design if it's built or if it's not built.
Okay, so then how do we have security if you have doors in there to go in and out of that corridor to go to, we use the one with the schoolhouse as a classroom. And I asked this question when it was first being proposed. So student obviously can go out to go to the one with the schoolhouse, but then how do they get in because those doors are gonna be locked? How do they get back in? Do they have to go all the way around the building now?
I would think not. I think that, John, it's something,
Maintain the doors open. These doors are currently open during the school day now. The corridor is cut off, the area is cut off by the fence.
Right.
So the doors will remain open and allow the egress into
at some point, there was some discussion about key cards, right? Which would allow that to at least happen without keeping doors unlocked. That is the case on some of the perimeter doors for sure. But I think that's something we could continue to look at. Yep. Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you, trustees. The only question I had was just, you gave a summary of the borrowing so far, that of the 39.9, there's 15 point, you don't have to go back to it, but 15.2, which is, I'm not going to give the percentage, but let's say it's roughly 40%, or if it's 15 times 3, it's a little more than a third, so we'll call it 40%. Is that about representative of the amount of overall work that we've taken on so far? Because it seems like there's a lot to go.
There is a lot to go still. There's a lot to go. But what was awarded, you mean for phase one?
Yes.
Strictly, right,
Well, overall, you said of the overall 39.9 in the bond,
Right.
that we've borrowed 15.2.
Yes.
So 38%, whatever that is. Now that 15 has not all been spent yet, of
No,
course.
no, because we haven't necessarily even
Can't pay for
begun
doors-
the bulk
can't pay for doors
of
until
summer
they're-
two also though,
Yeah.
right? Summer two construction is actually bigger than summer one construction.
So I guess my question is more overall, just for the sense of the community and for the board, How far into this are we? 20% completed of all these projects? That's a tough question, I know.
It is
but-
a tough question without going and looking at, really looking to see what's been completed to and at what completion percentage. Because the difficult thing is that even though the spaces are working and they're complete for summer one, they're not 100% complete yet. So it is very difficult to answer, I think, off of that.
Okay. Because when we ask a question about individual projects, you always, you've been so good about knowing where everything is. So I got greedy with my questions.
No, that's
but-
okay. I mean, we can certainly, with Olivia and Seven, work through that. But I think we need a little time to pull
Yes.
that number together.
And the fact that the work has been completed doesn't mean the contractors have been paid
Right.
that amount. So there still
Yes.
remains a lot of money on the books
Mhm.
until all the work is verified by the architect, by the construction manager, by John Hall. Then my office looks at it before we pay it. So at the end of this year, there'll be a lot of money on the books, because as of the end of June, we hadn't paid a lot at all. In fact, that goes to the 8%. We hadn't even paid that at that point. So, and that's how it's going to be. And then even at the end, we still have retainage that we have to hold for a very long time before we release it.
I appreciate that from both of you. And I want to say I appreciate this presentation. I emailed you yesterday. I was excited about this,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah,
did not
thanks.
disappoint. There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on.
and
And
I
we
know-
still have a lot to do on phase 2.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So-
Okay, with that, I think
Thank
we
you
will.
all very much.
Yeah,
for your
thank you very
time.
much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tina. Okay, with that, we'll go into our next discussion topic, which I will hand over to our superintendent, please.
Thank you, Dave. The second topic for tonight that I've been asked to introduce is the results of the DASA investigation that was done last spring. I've got a lengthy report, as Tina did. I hope you'll bear with me, but I think it's very worthwhile and really does capture what was done and where we are now. So I'd like to introduce this discussion item by first offering some well-known historical context. Last year, North Shore Middle School experienced a year that can only be described as unique. It was one of the only schools on Long Island to meet live every day of the year without resorting to an only remote option, instruction. Principal Rob Dennis and Assistant Principal Brendan Nelson were asked to turn the school inside out and upside down to create this live option. They did so successfully. It involved using large spaces for offices and capturing every small space for classroom space. Small groups of students were podded together and teachers moved around them. Staff was stretched to an extreme degree, and there were occasions where students were in rooms awaiting the arrival for the next adult to start their class. I visited the school a couple of times last spring, and I walked away impressed by the willingness of the staff to engage in this entirely new way. I was not there for the entire year, but I can imagine that this was also an anxiety-producing situation for kids, for staff, for parents, and for administrators. The plan met its goal of live instruction for the entire year, and as that was the goal, congratulations are in order. However, there were some unintended consequences. Students left unintended is rarely a good idea. The repercussions of some of these unsupervised times carried out into playgrounds and cafeterias. Stress, whenever experienced, finds an outlet, and that was the case in some untoward student behaviors and the struggle for everyone in that building to find ways to respond to circumstances never before seen. Early in the year, student behaviors were brought to the attention of the administration and then to the board. Based on some of those behaviors and incidents that were described to the board initiated a DASA investigation of those alleged incidents that took place in the spring and this investigation took place in the spring and early summer of 2021. Before I discuss the findings of the investigation, I'd like to just remind everybody a little bit about DASA and what this process entails. I'm sure you'll all remember New York State's Dignity for Students Act, the Dignity Act, seeks to provide the state's public elementary and secondary school students with a safe and supportive environment free from discrimination, intimidation, taunting, harassment, and bullying on school property, a school bus, or at any school function. The Dignity Act was signed into law on September 13th, 2010, and took effect in 2012. The Dignity Act also amended Section 801 of New York State Education Law regarding instruction in civility, citizenship, and character education by expanding the concepts of tolerance, respect for others, and dignity to include an awareness and sensitivity in the relations of people. Based on those obligations, the district embarked upon an investigation of those student behaviors, and that investigation began on May 11th of 2021. District Counsel Fraser Feldman was asked to review certain letters that had been received by the board and to, quote, follow the facts wherever they went, end quote. Counsel was asked to interview parties and then issue a report with recommendations. The investigation stretched over 56 days, complicated by the end of the school year and scheduling conflicts that are predictable at that time of year. Every person who was contacted or asked to be interviewed was accommodated. Ultimately, 39 interviews were conducted, and during those sessions, individuals were assured of their confidentiality in reporting. That guarantee must also be honored tonight, and we will not be speaking about discrete incidents or events. Counsel states confidently that ultimately every person who requested an interview was interviewed. There was also a documentary review of 63 documents and reports. The investigation was completed by District Counsel, and a report was submitted to this board in August of 2021. The board then met with counsel to ask questions, requested some additional information, and has asked me to introduce the recommendations of the report to the public tonight. It is a lengthy report, and in my presentation tonight, it is imperative that I too respect student confidentiality, parent confidentiality, and staff confidentiality, and focus on the recommendations made in the report, recommendations that were made based on the findings. There are 3 strong and broad recommendations that were offered. I'll list each and then talk a little bit about where we are in implementing each of them. Recommendation 1, implement staff training in DASA compliance. This outgrowth of the report that reminds us that DASA implementation best begins at the building level, not by way of an outside after-the-fact investigation. This recommendation is a viable one, and the implementation of it has already begun. Number 1, on tonight's agenda, you will note the appointment of DASA building-level coordinators, as well as a district-level coordinator in the person of Dr. Zublionis. These are the individuals in each building and at the district level who will ensure that DASA processes and procedures are promulgated and followed. 2, these appointments are not a passive act. It also involves updated training for these individuals, and that training took place this past Tuesday, utilizing a recognized expert in this area, Dr. Karen Siris, formerly of the Oceanside School District. 3, website. We will be creating a new page on the district website that will help anyone navigate the DASA process more easily. 4, student engagement. Our building administrators will be asked to find ways to make certain that students know what DASA is and how they can avail themselves of information and reporting procedures. 5, funding. Dr. Zublionis has already utilized Title IV federal funding to add mental health positions that will assist in supporting students who might feel marginalized and that might need the protection of DASA. And finally, under this heading 6, DASA district committee and building committees will exist this year and will involve staff and parents and perhaps students where appropriate. The second recommendation, implement staff training in student discipline procedures. There are procedures in New York State related to how student discipline is attempted, accomplished, and reported. These regulations are codified in Commissioner's Regulations, Section 3214. It has been recommended, and we will follow through, that these regulations be reviewed, cross-referenced with board policy, and fine-tuned to any degree that they might be enhanced. This will include a documentary review of the notices that we utilize and the way that we utilize them. In addition, our administrative teams meet regularly, and this will be a topic of discussion in our meetings with building administrators on a regular basis. Finally, end-of-year reporting to the state will be completed and verified. The third and final recommendation, make every effort to reduce or eliminate unsupervised time. I'm a frequent visitor to our middle school. While my initial impressions, and I hope the impressions of others, are of a school that is efficient and certainly safe, I always inquire of Principal Imperial and Assistant Principal Nelson if we are giving them all the resources they need to continue their mission. They have developed a schedule this year that does reduce unsupervised time, and they have successfully utilized staff to maintain an appropriate level of visibility of adults in the halls and large areas where students congregate. We've added some monitors this year, although I note that it is difficult for all employees, including schools, to staff positions right now. We've added a new position in the way of a permanent sub to create continuity and develop talent. And finally, they both know, I believe, that if there are other requests, Dr. Zublionis, Ms. Blatzy, and I will be responsive. To be clear, the administration, faculty, and staff of North Shore Middle School have done a phenomenal job this year of bringing our kids back to a school that is welcoming, supportive, and productive. We are all committed to doing whatever else needs to be done to support them and our students. If further assistance is needed in reducing unsupervised time, we stand at the ready. Those represent the 3 recommendations and a status report on how they are being met. But before we close on the topic, I'd like to return to DASA for just a minute to elaborate on the training and on our approach to this important topic. Last week, I was able to attend the New York State Council of School Superintendents Conference, and I thank the board for supporting my attendance there. While I was there, I heard one of my professional mentors speak, and that was Dr. Bill Johnson, former superintendent of the Rockville Central School District, where he served as superintendent for well over 25 years. Dr. Johnson, and despite his request, that is what I still call him, reduced his practice to 3 words. All means all. In the Dignity for All Students Act, it is worth recalling that small word, and for the community to hear that we do have that commitment to all students. Our schools are and need to be safe places for students, where students can do where we do all that we can to ensure that their learning, their social and emotional growth, and even their happiness are not impeded by any factor. The training that took place earlier this week was extensive, over 100 slides and some very thought-provoking conversations that later we are better prepared to protect all of our children, but everyone must be vigilant. Even this morning, we heard of another tragic incident from another state that traced its origins to the word bullying, a word only recently introduced to our official educational lexicon. We need to be, and we are vigilant in this regard. I do want to note that one of the programs cited in the training that took place this week was Ruler, a program that has already been introduced in the North Shore School District. I know that Glenwood Landing has relied upon it for several years. Our 2 elementary schools are training in it now, and it will be introduced in our middle school soon. I want to thank Dr. Zublionis for arranging and executing this training. I also want to thank the district administrators for the way they embraced and actively participated in the training this week. I am very anxious to assure the board and the community that we are integrating the findings of this report and that we all recognize that their importance and significance, and that it has reminded all of us of our commitment to all children. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dolan. I appreciate that report. You are someone who's exemplary at speaking without looking at your notes, but I know for something like this, it's important for you to make sure you get exactly what you want to say expressed. And your admonition to us to ensure that as we discuss this as a board, we keep in mind the extreme sensitivity to all the privacies contained in that report is something to which we need to have strict adherence. So I will now turn it over to the board if they have questions with that reminder in place. Trustee McCary, please.
I guess I have more comments. And first, I just want to thank all the children, because there were children who came forward, as well as parents who came forward to share their experiences. And that's not an easy thing to do, right? To come forward in that way and tell your story. And sometimes they weren't just telling their stories, but they came forward to support the stories of other students. And it's not an easy thing. And I think as a board, we have to recognize that and also convey to them that taking that risk, being brave in that way, will help our schools be safer and more supportive places. I also want to comment that the report spoke a lot about the victims. And I think as a board, we also have to acknowledge sort of what Tom just said, that we have to support all students. And in your remarks, Tom, I know that you mentioned that we hired another mental health provider to deal with children who feel marginalized, but I think it's really important that we also understand that the children who might be perpetrating this bullying or acts of aggression also have their own stories that might involve trauma or discord in their families, and that they also need to have access to mental health professionals. It would be like the equivalent of just treating victims of domestic violence and not treating people who are the perpetrators. So we have to intervene on both levels. I was thinking a little bit too, after reading the report, on the developmental trajectory of like anger and aggressive behaviors from a psychological perspective. And the greatest incidence of aggression really occurs at 2.5 years old. But when we look from the age range of 9 to 18, acts of aggression and anger are the highest in the middle school years. That's just what the research shows. And when you look at why that occurs, there's really two things going on. One is that children of that age in middle school often have lack of their impulse control is not as sophisticated, but we also see the acts of aggression coming from rumination of resentment that they have. So I think in terms of looking at like how we approach it on a school-wide level, we have to look at interventions that target impulse control as well as this, building resentment that might lead to acts of aggressiveness. So we do have you said that you're going to introduce the ruler program. And of course, even tonight, we're going to vote on different like a school-wide programming. But we really don't have any data on whether what we're doing is effective. And I think that's something that we really need to look at. We do have the suspension reports, but I think we might want to think in a more like sophisticated way. If we're putting money toward this, if we're spending time on interventions, we need to know whether what we're doing is effective or not. So thinking about like pre and post ways to measure this, I think might be important. And I know that we also spoke about, let me just say one other thing on that. There are interesting ways to do school-wide interventions for anger and aggressive behaviors. There are screening tools available that screen for to try to make predictions on aggressive behaviors. Also, there are screening tools that look at whether someone is likely to be bullied, and then you can intervene specifically at those levels. So there are things that can be done. It might not be appropriate for the setting, but it's something to consider. And in terms of the unsupervised time, I'm glad that you're addressing it and you're hiring additional staff. I'm also interested in what I would call like undersupervised time, where there might be monitors or adults who are in the area, but maybe who can benefit from additional training so that they're able to look for some of the clues or cues that might indicate problems are brewing. Thank you.
Thank you. Other trustees who?
I'll go.
Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, is that better? No. Like this? Then I can't see my notes now. Well, I do want to say thank you to Tom and to Chris and all the administrators who are obviously taking this seriously, as it is a very serious issue. I think my biggest concern when reading through the whole investigation is that for every complaint we received, there are probably 4 or 5 or more incidents that nobody knew to speak up about, and that's that's concerning. As I was reading through it, I had to go back to the high schoolers in 2018 who formed Weave Together and go back and look at what they had requested, because I remember watching that board meeting. And I think that in some ways I feel like we've failed those children, because some of the recommendations that came out of this DASA investigation are the same as what they had requested. So I guess I'm just concerned that they were here 3 years ago, and I don't want to be here again in 3 years having this same conversation. it's interesting. So I wrote down the demands that they had, and I think it's important to go back and recall them. The first was sensitivity training for all staff and administration. The second was outline clear protocol and procedure for handling discriminatory incidents and articulate it clearly to all students, which I think is, clearly one of the recommendations of our investigation. Make teacher diversification a priority, create mandatory student forums regarding discrimination led by students, and establish a mandatory diversity and respect curriculum in the elementary schools and middle school. And I think that's, I understand where we're starting to implement ruler in the other two elementary schools. I think we can look at, other curriculum for the middle school as well. And I think there are ways to teach our children the difference between right and wrong in a developmentally appropriate way at a very young age. I think they're never too young to begin to learn about inclusivity and acceptance and respect and exposure to all kinds of diversity. I want to, reiterate that we need to ensure that every one of our students experiences a sense of belonging. And I think, lastly, I agree with Andrea about just making sure we follow up and ensure that any steps we take are effective, and how will we measure those? Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Sarah?
Sure. Thank you. Dr. Dolan, I do really appreciate your report on the efforts that the district is going through, and I want to reiterate Andrew's statement that we greatly appreciate the efforts of all the parents that were willing to participate in this study, so that we had additional firsthand information that's really going to inform what we're going to do going forward. I think the training that we've undertaken, made plans for thus far with regard to DASA, is important and necessary and terrific. But I want to also add that because DASA has reporting requirements for literally anyone that works in a school, that I think we need to make sure that the training reaches everyone, what to look for and what they should do when they see or hear something. I heard what you said with regard to looking at how we handle suspensions and the training there, but I wasn't clear on whether we have formal training in place with regard to discipline and suspension. So I would like to hear more about that. We know over the past, apparently this year and certainly last year, that we really needed to bring in a tremendous number of additional staff, whether it be monitors, security, etc., to handle the changes in how we were teaching children and where they were. I think we need to make sure that we have, based on what I read in the report, that we have not just the specific training about things like DASA in place, but that we have a robust general training in place when we're talking about new people coming in the district, potentially on a part-time basis, as monitors, etc., as what it is we want them to be doing, how they're interacting with children, what they are looking for. And I think that would have been extremely difficult last year, where it was very, very hard to even get people in the building at all. But nonetheless, once we find them, I think we need to make sure that we have a robust training program in place, or at least some training program in place before they're with our children. And finally, and maybe this is to Lisa's point, I think a lot of what we heard tonight and read in the report unfortunately resonates with all the data that we have seen over the past several years. What we heard from Weave Together, what we saw in the district's own equity study that predated Weave Together, just prior to the Dr. Giarrizzo's arrival. We had a very robust report. What we've seen in the Bach Harrison reports, what we've seen in the Pride survey that predated that, there's nothing here that contradicts what we have seen many, many times. And that's what calls for a robust response. This report is not the data. There's no outliers here. We've seen this many times. We know this is happening.
Thank you. Other trustees who? Sure, please.
I just really just wanted to echo that what my three trustees before me have said. I really liked Andrea's use of the term under supervised time. I've started to hear reports from my child about situations that she's been in where it sounds like they are under supervised, not unsupervised, but the people who are in those positions in those moments tend to be, not people with the authority that a teacher naturally carries. They're the monitors, they're the lunch aides, and they don't seem to be as well trained. They might be chatting together instead of noticing that there's an unsavory situation going on. So I really just wanted to echo the importance of not forgetting the training at every single level in this really challenging environment that our administrators are trying to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you. Other trustees? Okay, I just had a couple comments myself. So the recommendations are pivotal. I took notes as well, Tom. I want to make sure I get this right. The recommendations are pivotal, and that is definitely the highlight. I want to highlight, of course, this was a huge undertaking, all the interviews, the meetings, the reviews of all the documents. I want to emphasize that what we were focused on here was about student behaviors at the middle school. That's what a DASA investigation is based in, and what we were studying. So while we certainly interviewed students and interviewed adults, parents and staff, et cetera, this is about learning officially from an outside objective source what the student experience was. Because of course, under DASA, the quote, as per the report, the district is obligated to take actions reasonably calculated to end the behaviors, create a more positive school culture and climate, prevent recurrence of the behavior, and ensure the safety of students subjected to such conduct. We can't know that until we do that kind of report. One of the big takeaways from me is that while these student behaviors were going on at the middle school, different people had different awarenesses of what was going on, which of course is normal and natural. People are going to witness things, people are going to see things, some people won't. But I think not all people were aware that hate speech and bullying was occurring among students at the middle school. And I think when that awareness of what's going on is not shared, is not universally known by all people, it does allow folks to disbelieve and to potentially not take it as seriously as it could be taken. And I think one of the reasons we have these conversations and we do these discussions is to make sure that certainly everyone in the school buildings as a result of this, and through the recommendations that you and Chris and Olivia have begun implementing, is going to be brought up to that speed. I think it's also important for our community to know that these things are going on as well. And that's one of the reasons I think the board was insistent that we have this conversation. I personally don't believe that what's going on at our schools is different from what's going on at any school in this country. This is how children unfortunately behave. These are the things that people bring to schools, particularly public schools, where everyone is brought together based on geography, and we all have a learning environment that brings people from all different sorts of backgrounds and experiences and value systems together in one place. And while, of course, we wish they weren't happening, if everyone in the community and the schools knows that those things are happening, that will help us to work together as in finding a solution. I think when there's that disparate knowledge base of what's actually happening, it does allow people to say, well, it's not really going on, or people are making a big deal about something that's not there. That report, which so much time and effort went into, was not an easy report to read. And I'm sure those interviews were not easy to conduct. So they're professionals and they do these things, but it was difficult. But I think one of the things that North Shore does and should take pride in is that when we have things that are difficult, we don't put them under the rug, or we shouldn't put them under the rug. And I think we've heard today expressed from my fellow trustees that we need to make sure we don't do that this time, because that's not the Viking way. That's not how we deal with things. And so coming up proactive solutions where everyone knows what's going on, not the details, of course, but everyone knows the general sketches, that there are behaviors going on in our schools that are impeding students' ability to come here and learn and grow and feel safe. That's the problem. We all need to be on the same page. And that base of knowledge will allow the recommendations to take hold and succeed. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. I appreciate the fellow trustees putting this together. I appreciate the work of the previous administration to facilitate this. We can have a report that is so robust and helpful and factual and detailed. And I look forward to continuing updates from in this platform going forward. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dolan. With that, let me just pull up my agenda here. We will move on to comments from the public. We have a podium up there. Everyone is free to speak. Just give your name and town of residence, and we invite you to come forward now if you'd like to contribute. Okay. I appreciate everyone coming, and we will now move on to the action portion of our evening, which is sorry, that sounded a little more exciting than it is, but the action item for our business portion of the meeting, and the action, we're gonna have like one of those competitions where they battle the elements. No, we are going to go on to action item 8, which is personnel. Is there a motion on action item 8? Motion in a second. Okay, take it. Sorry, everyone. I know it's a robust move. I am waiting for a second, but I want to make sure everyone's ready to go. Okay.
Second.
Okay, so we have a second. I'm going to, while everyone gets together, I would just mention that these are various personnel action items, including increments for advanced study, leaves of absence, family and medical leave, different appointments, rescinding of appointments, substitute leaves, part-time appointments, change of status, approval of teacher overages, a resignation, additional in the non-certified area, additional appointments in the non-certified area, and part-time appointments. I believe everyone should be together. Are there any questions or comments on the personnel? Okay, I'll call the vote. All in favor on D?
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were voting already. Please.
So we're putting under the personnel all the way down to O?
A through O.
Okay.
So I had a question. We received a report about what goes on with the extracurricular advisors. And there's certain documentation that is collected by Ms. Lamar, that it's part of her job to oversee these extracurriculars and collect the data. Where are those reports that she collects maintained? Do we maintain them in central office, or are they maintained personally by in this instance, Ms. Lamar? It had been Mr. Galati personally, whoever has that job.
They were maintained by paper pre-COVID. Since COVID times, we have now moved them to an electronic folder, a Google folder that Ms. Lamar and I share.
So but how do we archive them? So were the paper copies then filed away somewhere? Are these electronic files archived? So if someone said,
Right.
had a complaint down the road,
Right.
or
That's a good
someone
question.
had an issue with the pay,
would we have the documentation, and how long do we maintain that documentation, and where is it maintained?
It's maintained electronically for this school year, the past 2 school years. And then Sarah Lamar has the paper documentation from the years prior to that.
So up until 2 years ago, it was all paper, and it's maintained by whoever is the person who is the supervisor of the extracurricular.
That's correct.
And we have none of that backup in central office.
What's that? I'm
We
sorry.
have none of that backup in central office,
The
other than the electronic now, the old stuff I'm talking about, the paper.
Right. So we do that backup is shared and available for the superintendent at the end of the year when the stipend payments are made.
But they're not archived for any period of time other than that year.
We still have those records.
But didn't you just tell me that for the prior to COVID, the paper records are maintained by the supervisor?
Yes.
All right. So the supervisor has them. They're not maintained in central office.
I believe Sarah Lamar maintains those records. Yes. Yeah.
My understanding is they are submitted at the end of the year to the central office. And in all the years that I did that job, I never got them back. They were kept in the central office.
Yeah. I can only speak to what I've been doing since 2019. I can look into what was done by Rob Kubicki.
Sure.
But I can follow up. I already shared with Trustee Galati, I had a great meeting with Sarah Lamar at the suggestion of the board, followed up with her to find out what this process is all about. And I had a great meeting with her and learned a lot about the process. It was such a rich meeting that I think the follow-up is this Tuesday at 3:00, where we're going to continue those conversations. And I'd be happy to ask that question. That is, are there files? Do they exist? If I'm not sure where they exist, Trustee Galati, I can find out and report back to the board on where they are. I can understand the nature of the concern. I am pleased to hear that since Dr. Zubliano has become involved, that we do have electronic. But let's see what I can find out about where those past records are, and I'll be able to report back to the board at the next meeting.
And just for the edification of the public, because we got the backup for this, but the public doesn't get that backup.
Mhm.
Can you please explain the type of records that are maintained or are created and maintained for the purposes of ascertaining if a supervisor, if a club advisor should be compensated for their time, and if the club is actually functioning? Because there were some clubs that are not in the report, that are not, functioning, that are on a list.
So the club charter form, minutes from each meeting, attendance from each meeting. There's a mid-year form that summarizes all the meetings up until that mid-year point. Same thing for the second half of the year. And then there's an end-of-year report as well. That's the second half of the year report for, from January to June.
I just want to say, I really appreciated Chris's summary of which clubs were happening and which clubs were on sort of an unfortunate hiatus because we hadn't been able to find an advisor. And then likewise, that we had a whole tier of clubs that weren't functioning, that they were sort of, I thought of it as like asleep. So
Dormant.
they were hibernating until there should be activity again. And I thought that summary was really comprehensive, and I appreciated the work that went into that. And I just wanted to say that anecdotally, that this may be one of those silver linings from the pandemic, is that, to me, from just what I can see through my own child's experience, is that even though they're meeting in person, since they're still using Google Classroom for clubs, they have these electronic sign-ins, digital sign-ins, right? They're going to the club, but the classroom always says to sign in, and there's this log. And that's easily authenticatable, right? Because that's different people entering data into a specific form. And I thought it was terrific, like a pretty seamless, easy way to track attendance that folded into the tools we were already using for other things, because they're using Google Classroom to communicate about when clubs are meeting or what they're doing or what the kids need to do, and to integrate the attendance in that. I was impressed by it. I really was. Thank you.
So I wasn't finished. So there are no actual timesheets though that are generated for teachers. You know how they swipe in and they swipe out. I mean, before the swiping, teachers signed in and signed out. So there's no sign in or sign out for the teacher or the club advisor. If it's not a teacher, sometimes it's another employee. So none of that is maintained as part of the records.
That's not part of what's
That's not
collected.
part of the records.
Yeah.
And also, I mentioned to you before the meeting that the link was not working with the way the document was sent, and I tried it on different devices. So if you could just resend those links,
Yes, will
I
do.
would appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank
Yep.
you so much.
Of course.
And just to explain, because I like to protect Dr. Zublionis, I sent that and I did send it as a scan, and I apologize.
Oh, no, it was nothing against
I know,
Dr. Zublionis, but
you will be very impressed when you do see the document that he prepared, and I'm sorry that,
No,
I
I'll
hope
send
you
that
weren't
to him.
pressing that.
it
for
was
too
like
long.
midnight, and I'm like, I'm not emailing Chris at midnight about the link, but yeah.
You'll have it tomorrow, okay?
So I'd appreciate it.
Of course.
Thank
yeah.
you.
And I'll try and answer that question too.
Can I just ask another question related?
Yes, of course.
Many years ago, there was a booklet, if you will, developed with job descriptions of the various club advisors. And I was wondering if we could maybe consider updating that, because it's tough, because you'll have somebody advise a group for a couple of years, and then when they step down, somebody comes in, and it's basically they're trying to learn what it is that the club is all about, what they're doing. And sometimes the club will take a different direction. But I think it was helpful to have sort of an outline of this is what the goals of this particular club, and these are the kinds of activities that, take place.
I just want to say, I think that's a great idea. And just at the elementary level, we had done that for students. We created like a little club catalog. So I think it could have that purpose at the same time for kids, and that might help advertise some of these dormant clubs as well.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to say that I think in your report, it wasn't just, there was a combination of why clubs went dormant. It was lack of student interest in some instances. And it was, in some instances, the inability to find an advisor who's willing to take on the club.
Yes.
And what we had done in the past when Dr. Melnick was here is we would review those. And so that when new clubs were coming on, the clubs that did not have student interest any longer, we would take those out. So if we're going to be accurate in the budgeting process, we might want to look at that again in terms of what's allocated for clubs.
I just want to say I really appreciate what for the work that you're doing, but I'll come back to that at the end, because what I'm hearing from the trustees is what I personally want to be hearing as a trustee, which is the recognition of how important clubs are to our students. They tick all the boxes. They keep students engaged. They keep students connected to the schools. They keep students pursuing and learning their own interests and who they are. They certainly keep them here and doing good things as opposed to being out there. But also, we're fiduciaries, and we have to make sure that there is accountability and oversight. And so I know Chris gets that, and that report was really helpful. Obviously, there's more to link that we'll see. But even in the summary, to understand what's going on, to see that there has been those studies of the dormancies there is important. So the balance of those things without sacrificing that student interest is something that I'm hearing from the entire board, and I think is really the direction we should be going. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And one more thing, and I don't know if this is even feasible, but I was just thinking about student engagement and new clubs, right? So we always think that new clubs may increase student engagement, which is really, the goal, right? But sometimes the new clubs are just another club for people who are already
engaged? Because much of this comes from students, right? It's generated by student interest. So if we are performing under budget, is there a way that we could figure out how to develop clubs that would engage the population that is not as engaged in school? In other words, I would like to find activities for students who are not otherwise participating rather than adding another club. And here's the reality. Some kids add a club just to have it on their college application, right? So they have 10 clubs and they're not doing, and then you have some kids with no clubs because they don't really have something that piques their interest. And I don't know if there's a feasible way of doing that, but
It's the forever struggle.
Yeah.
And without making, reducing it too far, finding ways to engage kids who have not been engaged is a struggle. It's one worth addressing. It's one worth trying to find out. My sense of this community is, this district is, that when students step forward and say, we want a club, even if there hasn't been one, and it can capture a few of those kids, you've been wonderful about doing that. But that's the eternal question, that group of students who have not found their niche, what do we create for them to join in? And we find some of them, but it is a struggle, and it's one that I've experienced everywhere I've worked, and especially as a high school principal.
I think it's a great point, Marianne, and it seems like a simple way to just ask them. I mean, all you would have to do is a survey. Are you involved in clubs? Yes. Okay. No. And then the comment box is, why not? What club would interest you?
That's often blank. And we could certainly try that again, but having tried that by way of a student activities director specifically, we can give it a try and ask the question, and we will.
If I remember correctly, in the Bach Harris, there was a question about extracurriculars, and I don't know if anyone can confirm my memory, which might fail.
It was one of the vectors.
And I think if I remember, our students were like very engaged in extracurriculars, right?
Right. Well, yes, the extracurriculars weren't the engagement so much as the school day.
Right.
I just want to add too that, like, given the robust discussion around documentation and goals for student clubs, I think the same could be said for some of our board committees where we have absolutely insufficient documentation or policies on some of the committees that we are participating in, some of which are federally or state mandated, and the committee members have no training and no understanding of what the law requires for the committee. So I think we got to look at ourselves too then.
Okay, I'm looking, it's a good point. Many good points made. I wonder if there are any other questions or comments on action item 8, which are the sundry personnel items. Okay, I'll call the vote. All in favor of action 8, A through O? Aye.
Aye.
Action item 9, the appointment of the Dignity Act coordinators. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Second? Question or comments?
I did have a question. I was
Sure.
just curious, just because I'm not familiar with all the names, is it all the social workers at each school that we chose? And I see assistant principals too. I was just wondering who these people are.
At the secondary level, we went with the combination, a principal, an assistant principal functioning in an administrative role, and then the two other individuals you see are both social workers. We thought that was a good matching in terms of process and administration, if you will. It's also a good process, a good match gender-wise, I think, and I think it'll lend to even greater support of students. At the elementary level, I believe we have all social workers.
That's
yes,
correct.
I'm looking at Chris to make
Yes,
sure you
yeah.
know them better than I do. We chose social workers. We only have one administrator in those buildings, and certainly they will support the efforts of the social worker. But I also want to say it's also individual specific. That is, we didn't just pick the social worker. We wanted to make sure these were the right people, and we feel strongly that they are.
Tom, just building on that, So what is the role of the auxiliary at the elementary level?
In the event, predictably in the event that if that person cannot complete their role, or if it becomes a complex investigation that they need some assistance, that person is also appointed and can take on that function.
And we think it's doable that a single person is the auxiliary for all 3 elementary schools.
Looking at Chris,
Yeah, the
think
reason
so.
for that, it's Carolyn is the elementary counselor. She's in all 3 buildings. Like she cycles through in each cycle.
Anyway, okay,
So that's why. Yeah.
thank you.
And aren't they also trained as social workers? And aren't the social workers also trained in DASA as well? Already, before, even outside of our training?
Yeah, they have a certification training. Really, all new teachers have that as well. That's part of the new for professional certifications. You need to have that.
Yes, exactly, 12. Sorry, procedural issue, but we're all good. Other questions on the DASA coordinator appointment? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Action item 10, community ed appointments. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
Questions? Discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Action 11, approval to participate in Long Island School Nutrition Cooperative Bid. Is there-
Motion.
Thank you. There's a motion. A second. I hear a second. Questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Action item 12. There are 3 letters in here, A, B, and C. I would like to add a D. Do I make the motion to open discussion and then make the motion, or read in D as the motion? Okay, so I would like to,
Wait, is that true? I thought we'd make a motion, then make a motion to amend.
but we're not really
Make a
amending, we're
motion, and then we
adding.
Make a motion to amend. Well,
Adding
why
is
don't,
amending.
listen, Dave, I think it's just going to be easier if you make a motion on A, B, and C, and then do a motion separately on D, right?
That'll work.
That'll
Yes,
work.
amend the
That will work.
agenda
Okay,
separately.
So is there a motion on 12, which is approval of 3 contracts?
Motion.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, questions or comments? I have a motion to add
Wait,
a,
you need to vote on A, B, and C, and then you want to amend, right?
well, if we've,
It depends on whether you're gonna amend
still
it
gonna
to
put in D
add
with
it
the rest.
into 12, or if you're just
okay,
gonna
you know
add
what?
it as a
I'll do these
separate
separately. So let's just A, B, and C on those contracts. Any questions or comments on those? All right,
Oh, I did. I actually did.
please.
On A, I looked that up. It's basically a program to decrease stigma from mental illness, which I think is a great idea. But I did want to make the comment that a program is a program. And I think we also need to look at what's going on systemically that creates such a large need for this kind of programming. So, while I am totally supportive of it, I just think that we need to continue looking at wellness, mental health issues in the organization as a whole.
Yeah, I looked at that program as well, and I definitely, what I saw was that it is going to, and we have this with a lot of these programs, it's a response to circumstances and student circumstances, but it also is going to spur additional questions, discussion, et cetera, that of course I know our team will be prepared to handle. And that's the reason we do these, to bring these things out, to elicit these students to communicate and talk and learn.
But that's different than what I'm saying.
Pardon? That is different
yeah,
what you're
okay,
saying.
okay.
I was making
Right.
an add-on
Okay.
comment.
I was gonna add, like, it feels like the sort of necessary but not sufficient, right? Like, can have the presentation, but standalone presentations aren't the same as ongoing curriculum and work. And that's what we need to be cognizant of. And maybe more to Andrew's point, we talk a lot about how to have SEL responses to what kids are experiencing. And we have much less conversation about what our schools are doing that cause
Yeah.
the need to respond. Like, what structural things exist within our schools that are creating anxiety, for example. And that's really where we need to go.
Yep, two separate points. What we don't want to do is sit when someone says, what's our approach to this? And the answer is,
We have an assembly.
we brought in this assembly first.
Right.
This is
Right.
one of, this is a, a subset of a larger approach.
Because
And
we know people have predispositions, right? Biological predispositions to certain mental illnesses, but actually it's mostly environmental, and children spend most of their day in the school environment. So what is going on here, right? And what can we do to decrease the interaction between the environment and the biology?
Agreed, although this particular is about the stigma of it. So the point of this, I assume, is to reduce that obstacle so it can make it easier for students to come forward, because part of it is that. Right.
Yes.
There is
I'm
a
sure,
lot-
I'm sure you're very well versed in students who are very good at keeping it to themselves and not making it part of their experience.
But we don't want it to just be easier to come forward about the anxiety that we created.
That is certainly correct.
Correct. But there is a lot of research by a researcher, Corrigan, that discusses how you need to decrease stigma to increase access to mental health. And that sounds like what this program is targeting.
Thank you.
I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah, that's soapbox.
I'm sorry, I need to ask a very quick question
Sure.
about this particular one. I
Yes.
just didn't see it absolutely in black and white, and I want to verify that I understand correctly. This is for K through 12?
Middle school.
This
Middle
is middle
school.
school. Where did
Yeah.
I miss that? Okay. Thank you.
Other questions or comments on A, B, and C? Okay, all in favor of 12, A, B, and C? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to add a 12D as follows. Approval of a consultant agreement between the North Shore Central School District and Arsena Risk Group. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the North Shore Central School District hereby approves a consultant agreement between the school district and Arsena Risk Group to provide insurance archaeology services to assist the school district to research, identify, and locate historical insurance coverage that may be responsive to legacy tort claims, including any extant New York Child Victims Act claims, as per the terms and conditions set forth in the attached consultant agreement at a cost not to exceed $21,000 plus approved expenses. And be it further resolved that the Board of Education hereby authorizes the President of the Board of Education to execute the necessary documents to effectuate said agreement on behalf of the Board of Education. Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
And again, I thank the board for allowing me to introduce that tonight. I promise not to make a habit of it, but I did believe it to be worth the exception of the rule.
Thank
And
you.
we had backup on it for a week.
Yep.
Thank you, Olivia. The backup made this very easy. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to lump actions 13 and 14 together, a special education consultant agreement, as well as special education services contract. Is there a motion on 13 and 14 together? Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments on 13 and 14? Okay, all in favor? Aye. We've come to number 15, board committee reports. Trustee Russo and then Trustee Jones.
I think Tina kind of stole my thunder on the construction steering. So I think that pretty much covers construction steering, with the exception of we had a district-wide replacement of the network cabling. And that is substantially completed, with the exception of the new addition to the middle school and an upgrade of the switches at Seacliff, which will be done over time within the confines of the budget. There have been 26 outdoor access points added at the elementary school. Some of these outdoor access points have been back ordered, so we anticipate that they will be completed around November. There have been upgrades to the lockdown system, and Infinite Campus, which is replacing the portal system that we used to use, is up and running. And there are the original ship date, by the way, for the outdoor access points was September, and the reason why and that's why they're delayed for completion until November. So I know everyone is interested in getting more internet outside, so there you have it.
Sorry, thank you.
You want me to do health and safety?
I will let you do whichever committee you participated in and have a report on.
I
As
have,
per the agenda, there we go.
I have the District Health and Safety Committee. In my notes, the committee met on September 15th, so I can't swear nothing has changed since then, but that's the report. The District Health and Safety Committee really covers a tremendous amount of material and a number of topics, but I'm going to try and give you the highlights as a result, because the meeting itself is easily an hour and a half. First, I would say we have scheduled, thanks to John Hall and John Ahern and our security staff, all of our regularly scheduled drills are scheduled for the buildings, which is not insignificant. We have to have 8 fire drills and 4 lockdown drills every year. So those are scheduled. The lockdown drills are modified significantly because of COVID. And we also had a discussion about the steps the security staff had taken to start talking about tornadoes with our school principals, because it's not historically a threat that we've had, but it became, much more significant and real recently. And you have the scenario in which you could all be in school and literally everyone's cell phone goes off, right, with a tornado warning, and people here don't necessarily know how to respond. So they've really started working on that in a robust way, which was great to hear about. They talked also about there's significant requirements for safety training for all of our employees every single year, and how we've migrated in another kind of silver lining aspect to online training that's robust and professional that our employees can complete. There was a discussion of the legislation at the state level around testing for lead in the water in our school buildings. We were very fortunate in that even prior to the first round of legislation that came out a few years ago, we had already started testing for lead in the drinking water in our school buildings. And the state came out shortly thereafter with some requirements that, of course, we complied with. There is now much more robust legislation that passed in the state but was not signed by the governor that we know of, that very significantly changed the levels of acceptable lead amounts in the water and changed how often you would have to test for it, but also significantly would implement a reimbursement mechanism for the remediation efforts that schools would have to go through. So that's something we talked about how we should start looking at the test results we already had and how to plan for that, and how to talk about remediation efforts that would, where we were already doing construction, and how we could try and dovetail those things to be as efficient as possible in that remediation. There was a discussion of the fact that we had our first flash flood emergency recently, and talking about ways to respond to that. We've had flash flood watches, we've had flash flood warnings. We have never, and in fact, New York State has never had a flash flood emergency, and that's why you saw, we all know how hard it was to get to school the next day, when the buses couldn't get out, when there were cars flooded out and like literally littering the roads, when roads were flooded and telephone poles were down. So we've started those discussions. And I think the other significant discussion we had was around the remaining issues on ventilation and filtration in our buildings, which became a topic because of the pandemic, but is also a topic that impacts the sort of health, well-being, and productivity of the people in our buildings, even post-pandemic. It is another silver lining that if you fix this issue, it improves the health of everybody, even when we don't have a virus that we're worried about. So we still have a few challenges. We still have some large spaces where we don't have the ventilation and filtration that we've tried to achieve in classroom spaces. And we don't necessarily have all the data together, even on the classroom level, about what happened when, to Marion's point about the supply chain, what happened when after 9 months of waiting, we finally got the MERV 13 filters for the Univents and installed them and still had to employ the firm to do the rebalancing. We still have to look at all of that data to figure out if we still have places where we weren't able to accommodate the improved filtration and still maintain the level of ventilation that you need to make all of these spaces safe. So well into this, we still have challenges, but all of these challenges also should really pay off for us going into the future. Then finally, we have the CO2 monitoring in place. Right now, we are not doing a lot of CO2 monitoring because with the outside temperature what it is, you can keep the systems on 100% outside air coming in. But once it starts to get colder, the CO2 monitoring becomes important. And it's important in two ways. When you do the CO2 monitoring to determine how much of the air you're breathing is basically air you're rebreathing from somebody else, the CO2 monitoring tells you if you need to open windows more, if you need better cross ventilation, if something is going wrong with, like if you put the HEPA filter right in front of the open window and you were short cycling the air. So it tells you both if you need more ventilation, but it can also tell you if your ventilation is good, right? You don't have to freeze to death or get soaking wet. Like if the ventilation is robust, it gives you the leeway to, have one less window open as well, right? It lets you work with all of those factors together. So I'm really looking forward to the CO2 monitoring data. And that's what we have.
Thank you.
Wellness.
Please.
So we met on September 20th and we reviewed some of the goals for the year. One of our main goals was community engagement, student engagement. We talked a little bit about a wellness event, a wellness day, something outside that would be targeted to everybody in the community. We also need to review the wellness policy. This is a triennial requirement. So the committee will be looking at that. We're going to be soliciting new parent and student members. We're going to try to increase our communication. We talked about some different ideas with the wellness newsletter, maybe like a wellness Wednesday. And then I think one of the important things here is really revisiting the challenge success survey and really trying to figure out what goals and actions can we do from the data. There you go.
Thank you. Other committees that have met? Okay, thank you for those reports. We will move on to old business, under which we have bulleted the LAC priorities. LAC, for those watching, is our Legislative Action Committee. It is a committee set up by the board, and we every year talk about and set priorities for them. So these incredibly generous community volunteers can assist the board with various legislative functions, everything from advocacy to working with our legislators to informing and liaising with the community to share information about what's going on in the district. So I'd like to start by hearing from the board about what priorities you foresee for the LAC committee this year. I was going to say, don't feel any obligation, but please do.
I have so much to say.
Okay, I'll go Sarah and then Marianne.
Do you want to go?
No, go ahead.
So, and maybe Miriam wants to chime in on this, and that there really are some like core LIPA things that need to happen with regard to LIPA. The legislative breakfast that we had, 2 years ago?
Oh, I think
It was 2 years ago because
I went to go see a play for Mikey out in, and that would have been junior year. That's how I track time.
Excellent. That
February.
legislative breakfast we had was tremendous and very helpful. And these sort of like outreach functions, right? That LIPA does with the community. I think those are enormous. I, over the past month, have been thinking a lot about what I'll call environmental issues, to have a way to label them. But I want to be more specific about the things I've been looking at that I think Black really could play a role in. One is there are Superfund sites all over this area. Some of them get more attention than others. So it's become clear that the ones where RXR wants to build things in Glen Cove have become priorities and are going to be remediated. But there are other ones that I think we should look at and try to figure out how things get resolved, including the one that's literally a block from the Glen Head School and what is that, 2 blocks from the water tower. There's a Superfund site. So I think that's the kind of thing that would benefit from a group of people who can do the research and figure out to what extent these are political priorities about what gets done and what doesn't get done. I spoke before about the legislation about lead in the water that could actually provide funds that would help us remediate the issue rather than just testing for it and, shutting off faucets that have lead. I think that's probably a complex issue about why that hasn't been signed, and I think it has things to do with what's the level of lead that's coming into the building, right, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's some complexity, but there's clearly a legislative component to it too. I think there's a question about whether utilities, to what extent utilities should have to fully remediate sites that they've stopped using before they just fence them off and walk away. To what level should they be remediated? Should they be fully returned to some use other than being fenced off and monitored? I think based on some of the things that I think I heard in construction, I'm not certain about how the state is now monitoring fuel tanks that are no longer being used is something that impacts a vast number of school districts. There are unused fuel tanks everywhere. Nobody knows what to do about them. If you try to take them out and do the testing, you're just rolling the dice. You don't know what remediation will be involved or how much it will cost you. But so if there was a legislative solution to that, or if there was even just a joint cooperative, even BOCES level effort, right, where you could remove these things with some shared cost and some shared way of dealing with the potential risk, or the state would just step up and deal with it, that would be tremendously beneficial to us, particularly if you're talking, I think, about like on Long Island, right, where unused, buried, forgotten fuel tanks could also be impacting aquifers, right? Like everything we do here is above our water supply. So all those things I'm calling environmental. I think there's a whole other category of random things LAC could look at that I'd be very interested in everybody's feedback in, which is I think someone should make sure we are watching what IDAs do carefully. I think very often you hear about it too late to be able to stand up and say anything before your tax base is eroded. We have a tremendous amount, separately, we have a tremendous amount going on with developments around here. And all these developments, the one in Roslyn Harbor, I'm talking about the one that's going to happen, RXR's one that's going to happen on the Engineers Club site in Roslyn Harbor is one. Obviously, we have the condos down by the Swan Club. There's, development that's going on over by the water towers. The development in Glen Cove is significant. RXR will continue to build out and add additional units in Glen Cove, which impacts us in terms of environmental impacts, in terms of traffic impacts. We could talk about civil service issues. This has been an ongoing issue for some time, that we need to be able to hire civil service employees, and there are just structural issues going on there that could be looked at. We could look at it on a legislative basis. You could look at how utilities are assessed. You could look at how the laws around pilots. Both of those things are complex and have almost infinite impact on us. And that's all I have, nothing else, just those two things.
I think it's only going to be a couple months, and then we're going to have nothing else to do. Marianne?
So I was going to combine another piece of old business with this piece of old business. We have lobbyists who are working for us with regard to LIPA, and we have not had a report from them in a very long time. I think the last one was maybe March. So I would like to get a report from our lobbyists that we are paying. And I would like to know if there is if there is anything that they perceive that LAC could do to assist them in their efforts. So we, when LIPA first came into being, we all wrote letters. I mean, tons of letters. They'd pass them out the PTO meetings and everywhere, and you'd write them and send them in. But when the legislators came to speak with us, they said, those form letters, we throw them in the circular file. We don't even read that, so don't waste your time. So it would be helpful, I think, if the people who we are paying, if they need some assistance in some way that would be purposeful, that we could do that. I think LAC could provide a function which we've talked about but never come up with a concrete plan as to how to explain the LIPA situation and the ramifications of it, not just the loss of tax dollars, but how it's going to be a pilot and how that impacts the budget and the calculation of the 2%. We talk about LIPA like everyone knows LIPA, but I don't think, especially for parents who are new to the district, who haven't lived with this for the past 10 years, how that functions and how that impacts our budget. And I think it's really important that we have the community understand this, because at some point, as we've seen, the shift in the taxes from the utility to the residents and the businesses, that we get emails about the increase in their tax, and why is that increase so much more than what the 2% number is that's calculated. And part of that is the reassessment, but part of that is also the shifting of the tax burden. And we're going to have understanding of that, because at some point, to maintain what we have, there will be a need to pierce the cap. And unless you start building that knowledge base now, you're not going to have that support later when you need it. This is not something you can teach people overnight. So I think LAC being more active in the community, going to PTO meetings, going to civic meetings, if they're welcome, to sort of explain the situation and why it's important, and what the ramifications are, I think would be really helpful in terms of community outreach, and in terms of the budget, and in terms of enlisting, having people engaged. Look what happened with the water when, you had people like Agatha Nadell on the cover of the Long Island Herald and Newsday, and going to meetings and explaining it to people. So I think we sort of need a face to this to go out there.
Thank you. Rich?
Related to what Marianne is saying, I think a specific case that we need to have the lobbyists and with LAC's assistance look into is the situation that New York State Legislature a number of years back established a reserve fund due to the closure of the Indian Point Power Plant. And basically that reserve helps the Hendrick Hudson School District and not a lot of other places. Last year, the legislature put more money into that particular fund, and because of, I don't remember the specific details, but it has something to do with dates of coverage, we really are not eligible. So I think this is something that maybe they could look into pushing a little bit to see if that can be amended.
Thank you.
I was just going to ask more of a question. Do we know if Super LAC still meets? Is that something that we?
It does not.
It does not. The other school districts have abandoned. Lisa?
I think that the ideas brought forth so far are really great ones. I had some similar ideas. One of the reasons I wanted to join LAC was because I went to that legislators night that they had hosted a few years ago, and I thought it was wonderful. I just thought that is the type of community building that we want to do, where we're all in one room. COVID is, makes it difficult, but, I think similar to what Marianne said about just disseminating fact-based information about our schools and community is so important, and trying to bridge the divide that seems to exist between the school and community, and just expressing why keeping our schools strong is so important for the community. I do think that Sarah's ideas were amazing. I love all of them. I think LAC's going to be very busy this year. Thank you.
Oh, and there's one other thing that LAC can look into. The bill to create our own water district was ready for signature by Governor Cuomo before he left office, so unexpectedly. And there were letters that were sent out by our local legislators to encourage Governor Hochul to sign that that water district legislation to create a national water district. And I think LAC could look into supporting those efforts to get that accomplished.
Please.
I ran out of room on my list, on my piece of paper, for all these incredible ideas. So I second, third, and fourth every single one of them. But I just wanted to add one more that's dear to my heart, that I think, I don't know if there would be an opportunity, but we've talked a few times about outdoor education and it being one of the silver linings, one of the few silver linings of the pandemic, and how much we'd like to see it continue. And I have a memory of there being issues early on when we were ordering tents and things like that. There were limits to the size you could put up, and there were different regulations coming out of state that really limited what we could do to make it easier to have outdoor education. So I'd like to have that on the agenda for LAC, if there's a legislative opportunity there to advocate for changes that would make it easier for us to establish and continue good spaces outdoors for our children.
mean, that's really the only item that we've identified that actually is directly related to student learning. So, in the past, we've talked about things like testing and recess mandates and those types of items. I mean, I don't know if this is the year for that, but I do want to make mention that we're sort of silent on those issues.
Okay, so I've been writing down notes as well. I'd like to summarize and then kind of hone this down to something that's an actionable plan. So Sarah mentioned the legislative breakfast and resuscitating that, which Lisa Cola Ciopa seconded as well. Sarah listed several environmental issues, which I also believe it's a very important area for us to have LAC focus on as a subset of their efforts. Marianne mentioned working with lobbyists and specifically finding out from them what we can do to assist their efforts in advocacy for, I don't want to characterize what you said, but various LIPA related issues upstate and potentially locally as well with in the county. She mentioned community outreach. I don't want to go out on a limb, but I think given that's one of our goals this year, I think one of the primary directives of LAC is to be a liaison between the board and the community. That's what we set up as one of our goals this year. We got tremendous interest and people wanted to join our LAC. We have tremendous interest, people wanted to engage us. We're going through all these efforts. I think it's a no-brainer that has to be one. So I don't want to override my listing here, but that's one you can star, Maria. We'll keep going because that was one of mine as well, Marianne. And again, you mentioned the community education as to why we set a 1.43 levy increase, and yet people are seeing tremendous increases. I think all of this helps explain what's going on. And when we explain things and share the information that's going on, it helps reduce that uncertainty and gets us to the facts of what's actually going on. The bill to create the water district needs advocacy. Rich mentioned the lobbyists, and I think also this sort of fits into the idea of working with the lobbyists that Marianne mentioned for various advocacy issues, but potentially tapping into the sources of the mitigation funds that potentially are out there that have already been earmarked and making sure we get our share in advance of what will be additional fund reductions. Lisa mentioned the legislator night and that was the right kind of community building. And Maria mentioned the outdoor education and using the advocacy there, which Andrea rightly pointed out is directly related to student learning. I think that one is probably one that we can do without too much of the resources of LAC, but I think it's important to have on there as well. So that's the summary. If we know that the engagement piece is one, I think the environmental piece is very big and is timely. I think it ties into LIPA. One of the things that is very important to me is the idea that LIPA has not, aside from the suit with NASA, aside from the impending settlement, aside from everything else, our waterfront has been destroyed by them for years. That has been taken away from us. And if we can create a standing defense of the environmental issues and the assault on this area because of its industrial past and now the utility past, that can become a permanent framework for advocacy to reclaim our land here. And the fact that you mentioned one of the Superfund sites is directly next to the school district, next to a school building, is very pertinent. So I would strongly advocate for that. So I think, does that actually cover kind of all we talked about? What areas are we not covered if we not limited to, but if we focus on community engagement and communication with the community in the various ways and trying to resuscitate as much of that as possible through legislative nights or breakfasts, through the school events. We used to have LAC tables giving out information, really re-engage that as we start to open up our buildings. It's not the same as it was, but if you put your mask on, you could have two people sitting in a building handing out literature and giving information, and certainly outdoors when that's available for all these different functions, homecoming, et cetera. It's going to be too late for that.
Voter registration, we have done that in the past as well.
That is one we haven't mentioned that we could do, but I'm not sure what the relationship with the school is and all that. So I don't know, Dr. Dolan.
We've done it in the past.
And in fact, voter registration during the school day with students is encouraged right now. And we're encouraged to find ways to get students to sign up to vote.
it's required. You're,
2
they're
years ago-
required to provide pre-registration, right, for 16 and 17-year-olds now.
2 years ago, that was the case. I don't know if that's the case now, but 2 years ago, the last time I was involved in this, yes, we had an obligation to register all students who were eligible to vote.
Which is, right, when the law passed.
They do it in history class every year.
Everyone should be registered to vote and participate. That would be ideal. But I think the administration can probably focus on that, and we as a board can ask about that and make sure that they're.
No, I don't mean with the students. I
Yeah.
meant LAC was at like back to school night with tables with voter registrations, because that was part of encouraging people to be registered to vote for the budget.
I think that can be part of the
Yeah,
community
yeah.
engagement
Right.
piece and education. Because I think it should be. People should have a say, whatever their particular view is, express it, or else someone else is making the decision for them. So I agree with that. So it's engagement, it's the environmental piece, it's working with our lobbyists to advocate for us on sundry LIPA issues. It's it's a smaller topic subset.
Maybe you want to call that more like the economic piece, right? Like, because I'm just saying, like, the LIPA piece, whether there are funds established on the state level for power plant closures, whether it's has to do with IDAs. I think that all of that, the IDAs, how IDAs pilots LIPA's impact, power plant closings impact school districts generally. I think there's.
Well, let me understand. In terms of IDAs and the impact on that, Marion had mentioned that that's part of the piece that people don't realize how that affects our taxes. Yes, we like business moving into our area, but if they're getting tax reductions, it doesn't mean that overall our taxes are being reduced. Someone's making up for that. And
Well,
we have
but she was
seen,
also just talking about the class shift,
yes,
which
exactly.
isn't even special. That's just routine, right? But no, Marion, we just wish to talk about you. Just, yeah.
Do I have it right? Are there, it's two parts. It's advocating.
It's two parts.
Yeah.
It's two parts.
Yeah.
And it does have an impact in the class shift and in the calculation of revenue for the budgets and the calculation of the 2%. So there are two parts to
So
it.
part one is explaining to folks, even, all folks through this podium and other areas, what's happening, why it happens, and how it affects us, and what the dangers are ahead, certainly, of class shift and LIPA, et cetera.
Certainly someone getting a pilot for 20 years to build something, right? Rather
Yes.
than having that item on the tax rolls as a taxable entity
Mhm.
makes a huge difference in how we calculate the 2%.
Yes.
Or someone moving up the street to take over a vacant building that already had an IDA tax break, et cetera.
So to me,
But so what I'm interested in though is like, is it helpful to have, like when we're talking about these sort of like outreach and engagement, environmental issues, is it helpful or no to call these like economic impacts, right? Because there are a lot of things that happen because of the way the law is written that impact us. IDAs, pilots, power plants.
I think the
et
answer is
cetera.
yes, but I think we're really talking about two different things. One of them is making sure, theoretically, everyone in the community is up to speed on what that means. The second is identifying specific areas where we need advocacy.
Yes.
For example, when the original LIPA plant was decommissioned in 2013, 14, whatever it was, there was an advocacy effort to get grant funds, which we were able to obtain. That is an advocacy that we would like to potentially engage LAC in again with the help of our lobbyists that is different from the information sharing. And that's, I think, similar to what Rich was talking about.
Yes. And so I think my point, where I'm going is eventually we're going to talk about the fact that a fantastic number of community members want to be involved with some of these board committees. And when we're talking about the environmental issues, where we're talking about, or whether we're talking about LIPA's core issues, or whether we're talking about these economic issues, these require a fair amount of knowledge, right? These are complex issues. And so I think what maybe we should talk about in a little bit is, if we have these big umbrella groups, are there ways LAC under its bylaws is allowed to appoint subcommittees, like that already exists in that structure, and whether we want to think about it in terms of ways that we can involve a lot more people by having both LAC and subcommittees that focus on specific things, because some of this stuff, all of this stuff is complex, right? So do you have people that are going to learn a lot about the environmental issues? They're going to learn a lot about the tax structure issues, right? And then leverage that knowledge into things that really benefit the people that live in this community. Which is why I'm trying to bucket them, I think. It's because I think
If you're
that's what
bucketing them
we're
because you
gonna
want to segue into a larger thought about this, can I say this? We've discussed, we have a general framework of things we've identified for LAC. Rather than finalize it this second, why don't I segue into that? I think you have something you want to say, and then we can go from there. So essentially, we have put out to the community application. We've asked people to apply to 3 very important committees. One is the audit committee, and there are 3 different levels of auditing we do in this district, and we have 2 members of the community who participate as members of that audit committee. There's a construction steering committee where we look at all the things that Tina presented to us tonight, as well as what Marianne mentioned and other issues as well. And we have 2 members of the community who sit on that committee as well. And then we have our legislative action committee, which consists of 9 members of the community, for which there are 5 openings, but there has been a lot of interest in all of those committees. Many more people have applied than we can seat, because these have bylaws and they're very formal. We, as a community, as a board, have been eliciting that interest, and we are thrilled to see this amount of interest, because not just are people applying, but they're people who are invested, people who want to help, people with really impressive qualifications, and we don't want to lose that interest by not being able to seat them, which we simply can't. So I think you had a solution you want to talk about, Sarah?
So yes.
Or proposal, I should say.
So with regard to LAC, right? We're very fortunate to be at a moment in time when so many people are interested and engaged. So if I'm recalling correctly, we can appoint 5 people to the open slots on LAC, but then I think the bylaws say that the LAC chairman can then appoint anyone to other kinds of subcommittees, right? So if we have big groups of work, right, where there's really there's substantial work to be done, since we get to direct LAC in terms of what they should focus on, we can suggest these large bodies of work that they may wish to take this pool of interested people and engage them on what they're interested in, right? We're not talking about just, decreeing that people things, but right, that we have substantial opportunities now that LAC can offer to people. And those things would be a very specific environmental committee and a very specific sort of economic impact committee. And then I think issues like a legislative breakfast night, et cetera, those feel like very core appointed LAC member responsibilities. But that's what I was starting to think about. That would give us a lot of ways to engage a lot of people. And those committees don't have to be restricted just to people that have already applied, right? Because maybe there's somebody in the community who's extremely interested in environmental issues, but when they read the description of LAC, it didn't resonate with them. But this would.
And then what about the folks who have applied to the other committees?
Oh, okay. So with the audit and construction, I'm sorry.
We had talked about last year, and we had started drafting up bylaws, budget and finance committee. So we can form another committee for budget and finance, focusing more on the budgeting issues than on the auditing issues. Because audit is really audit, and budgeting is a different function.
So I think we might be thinking along the same lines. I was really thinking with both people who had been, of all the people, we have so many people express interest in audit and construction, and some have very specific, very relevant, detailed work histories that speak to those things, but they all have significant professional experience that's helpful. And so we weren't able to formalize with bylaws, et cetera, a sort of budget committee. But when I went back and read all the board policies on committees, we could easily, just through resolution, establish an ad hoc board committee for just a year. And maybe we want to create one, a budget committee for finance professionals or a budget committee for professionals of some kind, to have a way to harness the talents of these people. And it doesn't even have to be the only budget committee that we have.
I don't think you need just a finance background. I mean, we can all budget.
I was just trying to
I think budgeting includes strategic planning as well, long-term planning. So Lisa had been working on the bylaws. I can revive them and see how we're going to compose it. But I don't think doing it for a year. I think we should think about a long-term.
I don't disagree about the long term, but I don't want to lose a huge amount of time to get bylaws and approve them and do that if we can do an ad hoc thing in the interim.
In other words, Sarah, I think what you're saying is that we have this interest now. We have folks that want to contribute and participate. They've taken the time, they filled the application out, they've returned it to us, they sent us their resumes, and clearly it's an impressive group. I think that you're talking about striking while the iron's hot in a year when engagement with the community is so important, and saying, let's not necessarily, because I think when we talked about that committee last year, I think there were a lot of good ideas, but it became complicated to become a bit cumbersome putting it all together, and it didn't come to pass. Which of course there was a crazy year and COVID and everything else. It's a very difficult time to put that together. But I think the idea is if we could put something together now and use the folks, not use, but utilize the skills of the folks who have come forward and say they want to be part of this process now, both to share with them the intricacies of budgeting, and then use that time with them to both inform the board, but also inform the community, the back and forth, and capture that engagement while it's hot, I think is what you're talking about. And that could serve as the basis of future committees. Because when we look at those budget committees, we spent time, we looked at the various communities that have had them. A lot had budget advisory committees. I'm looking at Olivia because you prepared a lot of comp information for various districts. But I think one of the things we noticed was a lot of them were active for a year or two, and then they kind of went dormant, and people stopped being interested, and it didn't really go anywhere. I know Trustee Madden had said there was one in Great Neck, and it was active for a year or two, and then it kind of faded. But I think if we can use this year to understand what our community wants to do, what help we can get from them, what we can share through that committee with the rest of the community, that might make a future more permanent committee strong and be something that through an ad hoc format we can put together pretty quickly.
The way you phrase it, maybe we can learn something from piloting it as well before we complete the bylaws and create the formal ongoing
My
structure.
concern about not doing a more formalized structure is that we need to be clear on what the goals are and what the scope is. So when you do something like bylaws, you think about what it is you want them to do. So I don't want to just say, yes, we're going to have this committee and then not give them an objective. So Tom, if you were at Great Neck at the time they had the budget advisory committee, maybe you have some insights into how they function and what their objective was.
It was formed just as I left. It was formed because of as Dave has just identified, there was a sudden surge in interest in the budget process. There were a number of people, the same people coming to board meetings, asking questions about the budget process. The board saw an opportunity to capture those talents, and a committee was formed. And as I think somebody already said, it lasted a short period of time. People came, they participated, and I do not know its status right now. But it was a moment in time that was captured as a function of people who expressed an interest.
The good news is that our existing policies cover this pretty explicitly. Like we have two policies, I think it's 2250 and the one that follows it immediately thereafter, that constrain committees. Like they say very specifically, the board can appoint specific kinds of committees on an ad hoc basis, and they are to meet, report, send that report back to the board. The board, holds the power to accept it, reject it, send it back to committee, to ask for more information, etc. So if we're talking about a time constrained ad hoc committee, the existing policies put some guardrails around it, but that doesn't mean that we don't want going forward to have something more robust like we have with LAC, with bylaws and its own structure.
I understand that, but what I'm not understanding is when you say we have, which we do, it's true, and I would love to have them involved. What I think where we got stuck is what role are they playing? Are they analyzing the budget? Are they looking at the 5-year expenditure plan? Are they a liaison from the community? How are they participating in the process? Because even for us with the budgeting, God bless her, it's largely done by Olivia. I mean, she puts it all together and then we look at the numbers, but we don't actually sit down and crunch the numbers. So and we review and say, okay, there's a differential. Why is that? Do we need to put more money there? And the allocation, right?
Yeah.
So we approve that.
Yeah.
So what role would this budget and finance committee play in that process, if that's what you're looking at? Or are you looking at it as
you're
a
right.
long-term plan?
That's the question. So if we think that's a good idea, giving the robust interest in the audit and construction committee, if we think that budget committee is a good idea, even if it has to be ad hoc for now, then the board should say, like, yes, let's put that on the next agenda, that we want
So it
to
sounds
discuss
like
the existence of
a
that.
way to achieve both those purposes would be an ad hoc committee, but one that has a charge from the board. I don't think it needs to be bylaws. There can be expectations written into a charge.
It's in the resolution. We can do it by resolution.
But I think it would
Mary
be
Ann
more
saying she wants the
expeditious,
resolution to be
could be more
robust.
expeditious just to figure out what this committee's name is, and then for the board collectively to write a charge to the board. Here's the expectation, and whether it's financial in nature or a citizens advisory committee, whatever it is, I think that could probably be shaped for them with what the expectation is and by when, which I think is
Right.
also
I
an
think we
important
have to. I think you
factor.
have to put this on the agenda for the next meeting
Exactly. That's
to
the question.
discuss if we do this, what would the scope of the committee be? And I would really look to Olivia too to be involved in that discussion. And I don't want to put her on the spot tonight. It's
No.
not right. Let her have some thought as to
The question
and that's really what we got caught on, is what is their role, right?
Well, yes, but that's for next time. So the question for tonight, though, is whether outside of me and you, who would like to do this, is the board generally in agreement that that should be on the agenda for a future meeting, this idea?
I certainly am. I don't want to lose the interest that has been given to us by the community. I think we clearly know from the conversation we had last year that having a budget committee, which we talked about publicly, would be the first step of that would be bringing people up to speed on all the things that has taken us as trustees quite a bit of time to learn. And I say this with all due respect, but it took me a full cycle to really get the hang of the whole budgeting process. If I even have the hang of it now, which I think I do. But we would then use that first part. We could discuss this more in the next section. We don't want to go into it now.
It's just, should we put it on the agenda?
I think we should put it on I feel very strongly that that is a good way to capture the interest. Other folks we haven't heard from.
I'm okay with that, but I just want to have a clarification here. Are we then opening it up to other people or just the people?
That's all part of the discussion.
Okay.
I think.
I think you would have to because you haven't advertised
well-
it, right?
Well, let's.
And if we put it on the agenda, all options are still open.
Perfect.
That there's one committee, that there are multiple budget committees. There's no reason to believe that just because you announce there's a budget committee, that there's just one with, there's a variety of options.
What I'd like to see at the next meeting would be, hopefully we can make appointments. I'm sorry, Lisa. Please. No, please.
I just wanted to say that, we have the goal of, one of our goals is community engagement. And I just think that we have some engagement here. We can't let it go. So I'm absolutely on board.
Lisa, Rich? For putting on the agenda. Under old business. Great. And so we will figure out a way to put that together as a bit of a proposal with the administration, so we can put that together. I would also hope that at the next meeting, just for folks, this is taking a step back, for the folks who have applied, who may be watching this or hearing about this or reading the minutes about this, we have not made decisions. The applications were due pretty recently. We have reviewed them, and we're going to be looking at them, making some next steps pretty soon. And I would think, because we want these committees to get going, our next meeting is October 21st. I'd like to be in a position for this board to be able to appoint people to those committees, to the existing committees, audit, construction, steering, and LAC, on October 21. I think it's a reasonable goal. You don't think so?
Well, I'm away next week, so
Okay.
so you got to have time for everyone to meet to interview.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll say that still gives us the week of the meeting. The meeting's the 21st, so we theoretically could have the 19th or sometime that week. But we are going to have to briefly go into executive session when we're done with this meeting, just to have a wrap up on that conversation. For those who are in public watching this, we as a board can discuss and need to discuss all these structural rules outside of executive session publicly in accordance with open meeting laws. But if we're discussing any specific applications or folks, that of course is not done publicly. That is done in executive session, again, in accordance with open meeting law. So I think that's where we are with that topic. And I think at that point, I'm going to ask for other old business.
I have old business.
Trustee Russo?
So we had a community member raise the issue of a parent advisory committee, and we received some additional information on that. And I was wondering what the board's thoughts were on that committee, because I don't want to leave it just hanging that we don't address it.
What were your thoughts?
It's not what I really envisioned in a parent committee. I think some of the duties some of the scope really overlaps with the parent organizations. I'm a little concerned about the request to meet with the board in executive session. We don't do that for anyone else. And those, whatever concerns there are, I think need to be discussed publicly because of the open meeting laws. And I don't want to give anyone the impression that they have access to the board that others don't have. Other committees, there are plenty of other, committees. I'm not sure exactly what the request is. I'm still unclear, because if it's a board committee, which is the way I thought it was sort of presented, then the selection process has to be, I think, with the board, as it is with every other committee. If it's a separate organization, a parent advisory committee that would be separately formed, I think they need to do their own formation and bylaws, just the way the PTOs and the PTAs did, and the SCAs and all the different names. Because I mean, I was in Glen Head when we switched, and the high school, when we switched the type of organization, and the middle school, and I drafted some of the bylaws for that, for the elementary and for the middle school when we switched to, and there were very clear reasons why we did that. But if that's the thought, that this is going to be a separate advisor group where the board has no input in who is involved in that group, then I think they need to find their own organization and then present it. I don't know, do we recognize we recognize the parent organizations, obviously, but is that something that's really what, we don't get involved with them. We thank them, right? But we don't really get involved in their functioning. So either they're a separate entity with their own rules and their own representatives, or they're a board subcommittee where the board has to be involved. So I'm unclear as to the goal and the structure as of yet.
Andrea?
Yeah, it was interesting because it was based upon New York City, right? Which has a totally different structure. It's a totally different organization. I don't know if the person who sent us the information realized that, but in New York City, there is one school board, right? And the members, it's 15 members that are appointed by the mayor plus a few other people. So to have that type of council makes sense for each individual school. For here, it doesn't serve the same purpose, and it actually creates, I think, a lot of redundancy, in part overlapping with the PTO. One, I think, maybe more simple solution would be to encourage the 5 PTOs to appoint a board liaison that attends each meeting in the audience and then goes back and reports to the membership.
We used to do that. I used to do that. We'd alternate. We didn't have one.
Look where it got you.
Listen, I've been on every PTO from elementary through coordinating council. So, and it was difficult to get people to go to the board meetings. I'm going to be honest with you. They're late at night. They're long. A lot of these parents have young children, and many of them now work, because who is buying on one income in this district anymore? So you can ask them to do that. They have done that, but I think it's difficult to get people to attend on a regular.
But we stream now, right?
We stream now, so it's
yeah.
so they can watch it at home.
From home.
So it's different than back in the day. But yes, I had the same thought. New York City doesn't have a elected board. It has an appointed board. And when I was reading the information on it, it didn't really seem to be something in lieu of the board. It seemed to be something that every school should have, almost a parent organization comparable to a PTO, and that it could be a PTA or a PTO, or it could be simply a parent advisory committee, and that they were leaving it up to the individual school as to how they want it to structure it, which is largely what we do here, honestly. So that, to me, the description really sounded more like the functions that we did as a PTO.
Yeah, I agree. And we don't want to do anything to dilute our schools' PTOs.
I agree.
Yeah.
Completely, because the PTOs do a tremendous amount of work. And the nitty gritty work, they're selling apparel, they're collecting, they're doing a lot. They're helping students in need. They've, again, as all
They
of us
run
who-
after school programs.
yeah, they're
They
doing a
buy
ton.
things that we can't buy in the budget.
That's exactly right. But I also would say, pursuant to everything else we're talking about here, this does represent another aspect of engagement from the community that we don't want to lose as well. I'm not sure that I think I had some of the same questions that you've raised, which I'm not really sure what the path is here, as it does in some ways, the proposal mirror the local school board, in some ways mirror the building parent organizations. But I think there is a clearly an expressed need for increased communication on some level. And I think we as a board need to hear that and listen to that and have that additional engagement. I'm not sure, and we'll hear more from this proposer. Tom, did you? Sorry.
Ken, I also received the proposal. As you know, it was on the board website, and like every other email, I answered it. And I sought permission from the author to forward it to the PTO Central Council, which I will be doing. I think it'd be great to have that conversation with the individual who sent us that proposal and the PTO to see whether or not there's a place to marry this organization that they're proposing with what we currently have. I'm sensing from the board, and I tend to agree, a lot of the responsibilities and authority of the Board of Education remain yours and cannot be taken. It is a New York City model that's being described, and this is a very different model. So I would like to try to get the author to talk to the PTOs and see whether or not there's some way to blend the ideas.
So one of the things that was interesting, the way the presenter stated, was that they were interested in some advocacy issues. And one of the reasons why the PTOs pulled away from the PTAs, other than it cost us a lot of money to be part of the PTAs, was we didn't necessarily agree with all their advocacy efforts that they did as a national organization. So we wanted to have a more homegrown, local control over where our money was spent and what we did. And PTOs and PTAs are not supposed to be and individual PTAs are not supposed to be getting into individual advocacy, political advocacy issues, political debates. It's more of a individual school building function, right? So one of the things the presenter had said was talking, I thought, more about advocacy. And one of the points she made was PTOs don't advocate. So I'm not sure what she meant by that advocacy role, but if there is something that would fill that gap between the PTOs and the boards that she envisions in terms of advocacy and communication that the board doesn't receive, or fill in the gap in communication from the board to the community, that might be valuable. But I just would like a more clearly articulated refinement of why this is why we need this in addition to our parent organizations. And I think it's a great idea to send it out to the PTOs, because maybe they have their own ideas about where there are gaps in their organization that could be filled.
I think we should probably wrap this towards closure on this. But we'll hear more from them, and I'm glad you brought it up because it is an important thing that was raised, included the presenter spent time putting that together. So I'm glad you acknowledged it. Other old business.
A
Sarah?
few things. So we're still looking for a retreat date. Take the old one off your calendar. A new query will be coming out. It came up earlier, so I thought since the law isn't that old, that we should probably confirm that we're in a good place with voter registration with our students and the pre-registration activities to make sure that's in place and intact. Do we have any information? This is very old technically because I brought it up like a year ago about the stop arm cameras with the buses, since the county just passed the legislation. Like, has the county sent us anything to allow us to opt in or not about that, or nothing?
I've not seen anything.
I had to refresh my memory, but we did receive something, and at first we are not going to participate. So it's something that I plan to work with Michelle on to see, because they were going to collect the money and we're not going to get anything from it.
I think the board would be very interested
It is a very interesting thing.
in this thing, because it's
You do the
complex.
compliance and then they collect the money.
It's complex, right? There are a lot of factors in play. So I think we'd all love to hear about it. I'm going to pause there and see if anybody else has old business.
Is there anyone else with old business?
I do.
Andrea?
Yeah, I do. Just to follow up on the buses, Olivia, your report included all the information on the electric buses, which was, thank you so much for doing that. And I just wanted to make a mention that came from Christine Lau, who's a member of Glen Head, who connected the grant to you. I mean,
Okay.
yeah,
okay. Would it speak to her? But she was in
no,
Texas.
right? Yeah, she
Yes.
forwarded it to me. I forwarded it to you. So I
Yeah,
just wanted to
yeah,
make mention
yeah.
of that. Again, I want to talk about the money that the board has set aside from our budget. We had talked about doing some type of board-sponsored programming, and I know that as the committees are meeting, they're coming up with ideas for engagement, but they don't have any money to put on these community engagement activities. For example, the STEM Club is organizing a community-wide STEM event, but they don't have any funding. And I wanted to raise the idea that maybe we use some of that money to support some of these events.
So obviously we have no idea what that is, what it looks like, what it costs. So I
Right.
would say we would have to have a specific proposal brought to us by the STEM Club, brought to the administration. Tom, I want to make sure I get this right.
Yeah, I've not heard from the STEM Club, but I'd love to hear from them. And for example, today we did hear from students who wanted to engage in a dialogue at the high school about solar power. And immediately, John Hall responded to Eric Contreras. We've established a meeting. Anytime students reach out to us, we will. I have not heard anything
Well,
about.
this would be, these are parent members and
Okay.
teacher
Have-
members, yeah.
I'd be interested in hearing anybody who's
Okay.
looking to organize an event, and we'll see if we can find a way to fund them. I don't know what that budget looks like, but
It's
I bet Olivia does.
$10,000, I think.
But again, I think getting back to the question of advocacy,
Yeah.
I think the first step is to present a concrete idea to the administration.
Okay.
DolanT@NorthShoreSchools.org.
Even though that's from our, okay, I got you.
Well, how do we know what?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
no, I
don't know,
got
but
you.
yeah.
But then we should also just think in general at the retreat, what other ideas we have.
For student engagement,
No.
For
the use
community
of that-
engagement?
For the use of that money.
that I don't think that would be a retreat item. I think that would be a public issue.
What money are you talking about?
So we had increased the line for the board to go from 5,000 to 10,000. And the idea was that we were going to do some type of board-sponsored, community-oriented event. Nobody remembers this? We can go back.
I have
into the
no
minutes.
recollection.
I
of
remember
that.
the increase. I'm not sure we had earmarked it specifically for
Yeah.
that.
Well,
I
that
recall
was
that.
that was the talk. I had brought up the idea several times, and I mean, I can go back into the minutes.
So I think what we should do going forward is if we have specific ideas for that money, they should be brought to the board so we could have some background beforehand and then we could have a discussion about it and agenda it as new
We
business.
can, bullet it. We can bullet it under new or old
Yeah.
on a future agenda so
Yeah.
people are ready.
Lisa?
I know that Maria had brought it up in our last conversation, and I had spoken to Dr. Dolan about outdoor learning before, and we had brought it up in previous meetings, and I know that Dr. Dolan is planning on giving us a great update at the next meeting, but because the weather's so nice and soon it won't be, I just want to make sure that we are maximizing the children's outdoor time between now and the time you give us your presentation.
I don't want to lose October. That's one of the reasons why we're having some of those outdoor events. And I'm going to impose upon my colleague, Dr. Zublionis, and ask if he could send an email out to the principals tomorrow, reminding them that the days will grow short soon enough and colder even faster. So I know we are using it. As I said earlier today, I have not yet been to a building that I haven't seen kids outside, but I don't have that standard of comparison. So I'm going to lean on Chris yet one more time and ask him to remind all the principals tomorrow that we're running out of time to do that. And I don't want to give a report and say, indulge in any woulda, coulda, shouldas.
And apart from outdoor learning, while we are still having a pandemic, it is important to go outside for lunch. And we heard really important statements from kids last year about how eating lunch outside dealt with a lot of really significant social issues in an extremely positive way. So we've been clear for well over a year that eating should happen outside, and we would like to hear that that is happening.
One of the
I
biggest
wanna-
challenges this week has been with, I wish he was still here, Assistant Principal Nelson. As you know, the tent is now up at the middle school, and we've had long discussions about exactly how many kids can we get in under that tent for lunch safely. And we're working on that. I know that Brendan has kids out there every day eating under the tent, eating outdoors.
Why do they have to be under the?
Well, hold on, so, Maria, Trustee
Why- I didn't
Muscat.
hear the question. Why what?
It's okay.
I was just wondering why they have to be under the tent.
It's just the easiest place to put the tables, because if it rains, you don't have to move them, and it's a convenient place to have a permanent lunch location. Kids are certainly welcome to eat in places other than under the tent. I just used that as an example of our continued effort to try to get kids outside of the building to eat.
Maria?
So I wanted to postscript that with a couple of comments. Ironically, though I am right there with Lisa on this issue, this beautiful time of year also brings with it, when you're eating outdoors, bees and who are, of course, extremely important. But I've heard reports from a number of children that it's hard to eat outdoors because of the bees. That doesn't mean that I don't think they should be eating outdoors. I do.
You should hear about the reports from last year about eating indoors with the ants crawling all over the classroom.
Right. No. So, but my point is this: that actually the email to the principals, it's lunch outdoors. To me, yes, it's sort of goes without saying, but that's not outdoor education. I think what we're talking about is other time outdoors. Lunch outdoors is great. It should happen, and it shouldn't be even. It should just go without saying. It should be standard as an option. But I'm looking for really and beyond the elementary schools, I'm looking for it in the middle school as well, and even the high school when opportunities can be found to do that. I think in our case, we have a middle school where a great many of the classrooms have doors to the outside. And so it's not, even that even makes it more conducive. So I'm, looking for that balance and looking to say, this isn't just about lunch and recess. It's about actual using the outdoors as a classroom.
I completely concur, and I'll just add one other.
I just want to say that we can, but this is not a discussion. This is
No, all right.
old business, so.
All right.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
just going to say, lots of people have spoken to us about the masks. If they're outdoors, they get a break from the mask. And that's another reason why we should really make sure this is happening.
Thank you. Other old business. Is there new business?
I do have new business.
Sure, please.
I'm interested if we have any data on dress codes, dress code violations at the secondary level. I'm hearing some things about students' attire being questioned. And I was just curious if we had any information. I reviewed the policy that the district has, as well as looked at the code of conduct. And the code of conduct looked a little outdated, and it seems like maybe something that we need to take a look at.
Don't have the data, but I can certainly inquire of the two principals at the secondary level as to whether or not it's been an issue this year, and collect any data that we do have.
I have to say, I'd like to hear that too. I've heard over the past couple of years, I've heard a lot of complaints about what's going on. And, some of the way the dress codes are articulated in some of the school student handbooks feels concerning. And the law has been very clear, right? That regardless of what your dress code says, if there's disparate impact on different groups of students, typically girls versus boys, then your dress code isn't legal. So I think it's worth looking at. Like,
Good. Got that, Tom?
Yep. Thank you.
Your pen need more ink? You good? I saw you taking notes during a lot of the LAC conversation, the DASA. Good. Other new business. Sarah?
in looking at the calendar, on April 28th, there is both a high school spring concert, which is generally a big event that brings a lot of people here, and a Board of Ed meeting, I believe.
Sarah, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. What else is on there besides the Board of Ed meeting?
Big concert.
A giant, the high school spring concert.
The high school spring concert. Thank you.
Don't they separate the spring concerts now into 3 concerts? I mean, they were doing that
There
for March.
are 2. It would conflict with high school spring concert 1. I don't know which group.
Which group is in high school spring? It makes a
They
difference.
haven't said. They won't announce that till
Yeah,
we're
to how
there.
they do it, but that may be a conversation if you're concerned about the date.
I do know this was brought to our attention. I think Betty and I had a preliminary conversation about it, and part of the issue is moving either of those events because of the April vacation, which is predictably smack dab in the middle of April. We can certainly look at the 2 of them again and see if there's any flexibility, but
The one that's on the calendar that we printed and mailed to everybody is actually the spring concert and not the Board of Ed meeting. Is there any possibility that we should consider having the Board of Ed meeting just on a different day of the week? I know, it's radical, but
we can
I
certainly
just
look.
want to
Yep.
put it out there. I think, I kind of feel like, and Marion's memory is better than mine, I believe, that once in our tenure, we moved it to a different day of the week, but I think it was exactly once.
It was once. It was once we moved to a different day of the week. Well, but no, maybe it was more than once. We've done it on the initial meeting.
So for the record-
The
you're right. Yes,
formation reading.
right.
We have a meeting on the
We've done
7th.
that on a different
Yes,
day. because it's
precedent,
by-
right there.
Because it's right where, because it depends on where July 4th. That's the only one, but we did
That's the only
move,
one.
we did move one once, Betty, because of, we've had meetings on concert days and the parking becomes a little challenging.
The problem we have here is we have a meeting on the 7th. Then the 14th is the beginning of a 7-day school closure. So the next week we're available is the 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th. 25th is a Monday night. Theoretically, it's available. 26th is a high school choral concert. No difference. 27th is Meet the Candidates night, also in the high school and certainly, hard to reschedule. So that leaves us with the 28th or the 26th, which is still the additional concert.
Wait, but what about if you bump to early the next week? What happens?
Yeah, we have a
Right
board
there.
meeting. We're back to back on board meetings. We have one the 5th. We certainly can't, yeah. And the budget vote is the 17th.
Right, no, moving it up closer to the vacation is dicey. I feel once every decade we move it to a different.
I don't know when that day would be.
That's generally the problem in the spring. I forget why we moved one. I think it was
Something, right, it was very,
So I would make the suggestion. I would say
cancel it.
study the calendar. Cancel what? The concert?
No.
No.
No. Okay,
Wrong.
let me try a different risky shift. And that, I understand perhaps different day of week is dicey. Is location sacrosanct?
Or the time. Why don't you change the time?
Well, there's a,
we used to have the meetings in every different school building once
seen that
upon a
done.
time.
We could move it.
changing
And-
location is easy.
We could change the location. It's
And
just that we
consider-
decided that we were doing everything in the high school so people would know where we are. So you can do that. It doesn't solve if a board member has a conflict, but I assume someone just wouldn't come.
I was going
if
to say,
their child was
you will have
performing.
trustees, right, that won't attend the meeting if it's just at a different location. What about moving it earlier in the day or later? Both are problematic. We get tired, we have work.
Later would be tough. Later would be
Later would
tough.
be.
And earlier would be tough. I mean, this is now a 5-hour meeting already,
Right.
and I don't know when we have a 5-hour block when people are supposed to be working,
Anyway,
not just
but
us
all
working.
by the way of saying, this is just new business. I'm just proposing we discuss it, not resolve it.
I would say if we're going to do that, then I would propose it with a date or a suggestion or 3 that we could then discuss concretely.
And let's find
So,
out.
no.
let's find out what
Is the proposal
I-
to,
No,
sorry,
so I don't have those specific dates. So
Not
but
now,
I reject
yeah.
your idea that we can't discuss it in the future because I didn't bring 3 dates for you.
no, I'm not saying that, Sarah. I think what I was saying was if we're going to bring it up next time, rather than sit here for 15 minutes and discuss something without any information in front of us, we could have something concrete, and then we could have a productive conversation.
Which is the point of my bringing it up now so that we can discuss it in the
And what I just
future.
said was, so when we have that next conversation, which I agree with, can you suggest some alternatives that we can discuss and have a focused conversation?
I thought the administration could bring us some dates.
I'd be happy to.
Okay. Is there any other new business?
I was
Plan
going
on
related
being on that date. Makes a difference.
related to that. It's not going to solve the problem now, but looking to the future. There's a calendar meeting every year. And for many years, the superintendent had a little p policy that there's nothing else going on Thursday nights. So maybe we need to look into that for future consideration.
That is true, because Ed liked to go to all the concerts too, and he did attend.
Okay. Other new business?
That's, yes, several. But yeah, it's a point that like, we don't want to preclude anyone involved on the board from going to a concert. I'm curious at some point if we could talk about what we're thinking about trips, given that the ski club exists again, given that Costa Rica's there, like, you know.
I have a
if we could,
meeting this Thursday, I believe, with Eric Contreras, and most of the trips are growing out of the high school, to discuss, first of all, foreign trips, because there are still some foreign trips that are at least being discussed, and we would like to put our heads together and make some sense out of those before anything's proposed to the board. There's also a domestic trip to Florida for the cheerleaders that is on the docket, so we're going to be discussing the wisdom of those trips and coming back to the board with some recommendations.
Okay. Okay. And
Ski trips I will include on the list.
Okay, and possibly those can include, like, because there's a lot of data about risk levels at these places that we're discussing. You know, the State Department has it on other countries, and of course, the CDC has it on
On their
states and
website.
counties, the risk level for states and counties within the U.S., and it seems like that should probably
And countries,
well.
as well as countries. So they will tell you that there's
Yes.
certain
So,
countries
like,
you
the
should
state-
not go
The
to.
State Department does for countries, says that level 1, 2, 3, 4 risk
Right.
level, right? And then that's what I got.
Okay. Other new business? Okay. Thank you. At this time, I would like to make a motion the board convenes an executive session to consider matters leading to the appointment of a particular person or persons. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. We'll have to ask for the room to please be emptied and the recording devices to be turned off, please.